All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Exceed. This is Gearface. Today, I'm learning about one of my favorite characters from Shovel Knight. It's Polar Knight. And I figured, listen, there's a lot of text on these cards. And I'm not sure that one expert is going to give me enough here to cover all of this text. There's more text over here if you can believe it. So I got two experts. Today, I am joined by Andarel and Rose, two excellent Polar Knight players. Guys, thank you both for being here.
Yep, no problem.
Hello.
Happy to have you. Very, very excited to learn from you about this guy. Um, as always, a couple disclaimers before we get started. Number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. That's not the only way to play Exceed. Exceed is fun. You can play Exceed for fun. I encourage you to, as a matter of fact. Studies have shown you'll have more fun if you do it that way. If the lines of play that we're describing in this episode don't sound like fun to you, play the way that you do find fun. Nobody can stop you legally. Number two, we tend to be pretty prescriptive on this show, strategy-wise. A little bit less so when there's two experts on the call. But you'll probably hear us talking about like this attack is pretty much always a boost, or this is pretty much always an attack, or really you should never do this, you should always do this instead, that kind of thing. Take all that with a grain of salt. Exceed's not a solved game. Polar Knight's not a solved character. I am anticipating and hoping for violent disagreements between Andarel and Rose. Make sure that the people get what they pay for here. So if our read on Polar Knight is a little bit off from what you play, and you think you know better, play that way and tell us why we're wrong, so everybody can learn a little bit more. But yeah, with all that said, very, very excited. Andarel and Rose, tell me a little bit about Polar Knight.
So, Polar Knight is, I think you mentioned like the most text-heavy of the season 4 characters, and really, Polar Knight is, and I come into this with some bias as one of like the main people who was working on designing him, and probably the person to blame for all the text. I apologize to all the new players who have been stuck reading my weird trigger stacking. But Polar Knight is a boss character. You know, like a lot of season 4 people say was designed to be boss characters, and Polar Knight I feel like really emphasizes that. So Polar Knight in Shovel Knight, right? He's kind of like the mentor figure. He's a relatively chivalrous, very like practiced, experienced knight who just shows up and runs around just doing big attacks and is like, I think, the honorable villain type character. And so modeling him, he was like the kind of quintessential expert, right? Like he's got boosts and set play and stuff, but mostly he just has good, precise cards, and a lot of his plan is very like season 2 in some ways. He kind of fits the season 2 boss character design, similar to like how Seijun and Bison do, at least in my eyes. Where it's really about like picking the cards and putting them in the right spot to do stuff, because he does damage.
I'm glad you said the word boss character because I was thinking about writing that in my sort of notes to myself, but I wasn't sure because I feel like boss gets used to specifically mean kind of
like
really
the econ, I mess with resources in a weird way kind of boss.
like Bison, like you said, but
Yeah.
also maybe enchanters who I wouldn't necessarily think of quite in the same way.
So when I think of boss characters, right, there's like 3-ish kind of fundamental traits. They should have like huge strengths that are specifically tied to their weaknesses, right? Like Seijun, huge attacks, really, really powerful cards, but you need to keep your economy going. Bison, like your cards are huge, but to turn them on, you have to like bleed information and get really predictable. Point kind of works the same way. Like he's got huge attacks, but he has to set them up. His economy is a mix of like cards and board state and positioning. You should feel like you're cheating if you're playing a boss character. Like you should have attacks that people look at and they're like, this attack is not fair. And like
Polar Knight has that.
He's got that. And the other, and like the last trait is that the cards have to be very specific, I think. Their cards should have like they can do a thing, but it's very much about like I'm playing the card, and if you eat that card, well, sucks to be you, because you just got hit by exceed polar plow, and now you're dead. I'm sorry.
So when you're talking about stuff like that, like a character whose cards are not specific, if you're talking about like I don't think anybody would call Ragna a boss character, for example. You have cards in his kit that are really good and really strong, but don't require like, yes, I've finally engineered the perfect situation for Inferno Divider to be good. Inferno Divider is just a good card. With what you're talking about with boss characters, it sounds. Am I hearing this right? That like all of these unfair things that Polar Knight is doing require quite a bit of setup on his end.
Well, I think the thing with boss characters is that they require actually not that much setup. Like the ones that require a lot of setup tend to be like the set play and the combo-y characters who have like they can engineer these crazy situations. Boss characters like, Bison, for example, is you get to range 3 and then you do the thing. Like that's all the
Okay.
setup it takes.
Okay.
The downside is really in like the rest of your kit, kind of working around the fact that you have those unfair cards.
I gotcha. Okay, so there's not a lot of like overlap where like if I'm in a perfect situation for one of my cards, I'm probably not in a perfect situation for another of my cards.
Exactly. And that makes you more predictable, is the
I
thing.
get you. I get you. Okay. Cool. All right.
My cat. 1 second, my cat is making herself known.
Aw.
We have a third expert has joined the call.
Yeah.
Rose's cat.
Are they loud? Could they provide a color commentary?
I think Rose might be on mute.
Yes, first podcast with 4 experts, or
oh my
3,
God.
whatever.
What Exceed character does your cat play, Rose?
Polar Knight. Let's just go with that.
Perfect. All right. Everybody's here for Polar Knight. We got it. Okay, so let's get started into a little bit about the game plan and the character ability then.
Yeah. So I think we can all agree that Polar Knight is a heavy. He's kind of a maybe even a super heavy, like a Tager style, slowish counterattacker. He every super heavy and heavy in the game, right? They're slow. They hit hard. The Tager has some like shenanigans about how much of that is boosts, and they tend to be very like as Exceed design has developed, they tend to be kind of more set play oriented. He is very specifically, he's going to be big, he's going to tank hits pretty well, and he's going to try and hit you for 5 to 8 damage, a couple of times to kill you. That's how he do. He is. Oh, go ahead.
We've been dancing around this also by calling him a boss character and all these powerful attacks. He also just gets to hit really, really hard because of the way his character ability works.
Yep. I mean, he has, I want to say, some of the easiest access to +5 power in the game, specifically +5 power grasp.
Hold up, Andarel. That's too high a number. The number you just said, it's too high. When hold on, wait, I'm trying to process that. The very first episode of this show was D telling me about Akuma. And there was a long time in that episode where he was explaining the concept of magic numbers and how +3 power is a lot more than +2 power. I don't really have like an index in my brain for what +5 power is. I'm not sure the number actually does go that high.
All right, so to put it into perspective, +5 power allows grasp to stun focus.
Yeah, it does. I to reiterate, that's too much power. So I'm looking at. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rose.
With a little setup or the right resources, Polar Knight can do that and strike in the same turn. Like there's just from nothing +5 power grasp with the support resources.
I mean, the setup is usually, and we'll get to this with Polar Plow, but setup is like play over power in your Exceed mode, right? That's like basically all the setup you need.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll get back to this a bunch of times, but Polar Knight is explosive. I mean, having baseline +2 power without taking actions is incredibly good. And the fact that it works on normals is very good, and the fact that a lot of his cards allow you to reposition the opponent, even though there are some restrictions, is really good. His game plan is basically you have +2 power, and when you exceed +3 power, and as you mentioned when you're talk with D, like 3 is a lot better than 2.
Yeah.
Is you have power. You don't have speed, notably. You barely have range. And you don't really have armor or guard, but you have a lot of power. Like, I'm talking about boosts and buffs. Like, you have those printed on your cards, sure.
Right.
The hard part is delivering that power, because your attacks are sometimes a little finicky.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. I mean, just looking, pretending that I haven't seen and read all the text on his card to know that I'll need two experts on this call. Just looking at his kit, like 5, 5, 8, as you mentioned, the normals, like he's not doing paper cuts. He's already hitting pretty hard.
Yeah.
But he has access, as you guys were saying, to a lot more than that.
Yeah, and it's going to show up. I mean, it's not hard to pop a couple of ice spikes per game.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about what ice spikes are and how to use them then, because I feel like that's going to be relevant pretty quickly here. Let me clear the board really fast.
Yeah, I was about to ask how you wanted to do that.
Put these up here real fast. So we have a second card here.
Yep.
5 of them, even.
Yes, we have a number of these cards over here, and
They're technically double-sided, but it doesn't do anything. So,
and I'm sure we'll talk about how to get a lot of them on the board at some point. But so Polar Knight character ability is kind of spread across both of these cards. Walk me through this character ability.
Sure. So whenever Polar Knight's attacking, right? Let's say you're here and you're striking with, I don't know, some reasonable attack, like focus. Your range, right, as Polar Knight is going to be 1 to 2 in both directions.
Right.
This is, I know some characters ignore this rule and have more restrictions on range, but for Polar Knight, it's very important. Range is in both directions.
Okay.
And so if you weren't stunned because you activated, you can place an ice spike into an unoccupied space. Again, super important in this attack's range. So if I played focus after activating, I can put an ice spike on one of these 4 spaces.
Okay. And
that ice spike stays there pretty much forever.
Okay. If my opponent is here,
I cannot put it there. I can put it here though, or I can put it any of the other 3.
Okay. There's
no way for the opponent to remove ice spikes. There's only really 2 asterisk ways that they go away. The best way is usually that you use your character ability, which we'll talk about in a second. The other way is that there's a boost. And also, if you have 5 ice spikes on the board and you need to place another one, you can move an ice spike.
Gotcha.
There's actually something I've been wondering for a really long time, but has never actually mattered in play, just because you have 5 ice spikes and you're pretty.
Is it the optional thing?
Yes.
I think that's actually a typo, but whatever.
But like, could you move an ice spike to its own space? Would that be a legal action?
I believe the answer is yes. It's been a while since I saw the FAQ on that, but I believe the answer is yes.
Fair enough. It, as I said, does not tend to come up just because you have so many ice spikes, you get to place them, you get to move them. If all 5 are in position, that probably means that you removed one during the strike because they were already all in a good spot.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so, you have 5. You have a lot of board control, but you're really not very mobile. So your board presence largely involves kind of configuring the board somehow that's favorable to you. If you think about Polar Knight, in the Shovel Knight video game, he's quite a predictable character, right? He has the big plow roll, he jumps up and down a bunch, but he's not fast, and he's not particularly mobile.
Right.
The thing that messes with you is that he's dropping icicles all over the place that hurt you if you jump into them.
Right, yeah. You're fighting his whole arena.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when you have one of these on the board, and we can take a quick detour into the ice spike itself, you can't have more than one on a space. This is just basically rules text, right? That when placing an ice spike, you can move it instead. So if you do have all of them, and one of them's here, for example, I could say, okay, after I played the focus, this one goes over here.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. Gotcha. All right. And then back onto his character ability itself, I'm noticing a hit effect here that seems kind of important.
Yeah,
yes, this is the fun part. This is, as a hit effect, you can remove the ice spike underneath the opponent, and this is very important. When you have multiple triggers in the same timing window, you order them however you want. So you can like pull someone or push someone onto an ice spike, and then it's still a hit effect. Remove it
I
under the
see.
opponent and deal 2 extra damage.
Okay, so and
Yeah.
because the placing them is an after, I could and I can't place them underneath them anyway. I could never do something like I hit you, I put an ice spike down, and then I pop that same ice spike. It has to be a setup from the previous strike.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You will. I think the only ability that will ever move ice spikes mid strike in a way that matters is the before on polar plow, and that's just like a specific thing.
Okay. So if
Yeah.
I did this, for example, if I revealed on instead of playing a focus, I revealed a grasp.
Yeah.
The flow of the strike, the way the strike would resolve is hit. He's not on an ice spike, but also I have another hit effect. Push or pull 1 or 2. I could put him here. I could put him here or here. When I do, I have another hit effect. Remove an ice spike from the opponent's space for +2 power. This goes away now. He's here. My grasp does 2 damage. I'm sorry, does 5 damage.
Exactly.
And then, as an after effect, I could place an ice spike in grasp's range, which is here or here.
Yeah, it would have to be here.
Gotcha. Okay. Because this one's already occupied. Okay, so
exactly.
So that's the flow of the strike. I'm using them to deal damage. They get removed, and then I will be able to put down another one somewhere, but I can't put it down underneath Ryu.
Correct.
Yeah.
You like other abilities might let you do that, and we'll talk about that as soon as we flip him. But with this ability, you cannot place it on an occupied space, so you couldn't just toss another one onto Ryu.
Okay, so if I'm placing my ice spikes in some other way, I might not have that unoccupied rider the way that I do in my character ability.
Yeah, you basically never do outside of this specific ability.
Okay, cool. All right, and this is just the way that I have kind of built in. I have plenty of other ways to use the character ability. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
Gotcha,
And this is kind of just rules stuff, but I'll throw it in because I see a lot of questions about it. If you play your grasp again and the board state is like this, where Ryu is already on an ice spike, this hit effect is printed on your character card. It's not printed on the ice spike. So you only have one instance of the hit effect. You can remove this and then put Ryu here, but you can't remove the second one because you've already removed an ice spike. You've already used the hit effect.
It's not on the ice spike. It's coming from, and there's not more than one of you.
Yeah, and that's why it's not on the ice spike. It's because you get that once with your ability. You don't get it once per ice spike.
Okay, so
that said, this is still a pretty good play because now you are already set up for next turn, and you don't have to do extra work.
It also gives you the good stomp positioning.
So in this particular configuration, I'm able to hit with grasp for 5 and not for 7. I'm sure there's no way to inflate those numbers higher. In his kit anywhere.
Of course.
But
yeah, so that's fundamentally how he works. As you can kind of imagine from what we've described, he's pretty good at manipulating the opponent's positioning. He's actually way better at moving the opponent than he is at moving himself.
Okay.
So he does have a shockingly good movement boost, which we will get to.
Yeah, he's lumbering, right? Like he can haul, but when he moves, it's just like a single big movement. His nuanced positioning is terrible.
He picks a direction and just goes until he's done. He can't he can't
micro move the way.
Yeah, okay.
He needs to take the move action if he wants to move small distances.
He's not like this guy. I gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's very unlike Ryu.
Okay. In many ways, he's unlike Ryu. Okay.
But I will say he is also a pretty fundamentals generalist character in his own way, despite also being a boss character. You are playing this really heavy positioning ice spike style. But once you do that, your reward is you get to be really good at the game called Exceed. It's not that you're playing your own game.
Okay, you're not. Yeah, that makes sense. And positioning is an important part of Exceed, and it's just that he's positioning. He's worried about his opponent's position, his own position, and all of these other little the ice spike positions as well.
He's two sides of the same coin, with Propeller Knight being the other one, where they're the two really micro position-y characters in season 4, I think.
Okay.
Shovel and Shield kind of have that, but Prop is much more kind of self and the range of the opponent. Polar Knight is just where everyone is on the board. He cares about the board.
Right. Okay. So and that'll be a skill testing thing, and as we go through this, we'll probably find some some useful
Yep.
heuristics, useful ways to place some of his attacks. Is there anything more about like the super macro game plan before we get into the kit that we want to cover?
Well, we should talk about his Exceed because
Oh
that's
yes, please, of
quite
course.
important.
The name of the game we're playing.
Yeah. So Polar Knight's Exceed has two things. The first and most obvious thing is that your ability basically stays the same, but it's now +3 power. And as we've mentioned,
Three's
3 is a
more.
lot.
Yep.
The other thing that happens is 3 ice spikes drop immediately
Okay.
when you exceed, and it's occupied or unoccupied. So one of like you might not want to exceed if you already have 4 or 5 ice spikes down, and you're not really going to get value out of that kicker. And the benefit is that you get to set up the perfect like board positioning for your spikes as soon as you flip. So choosing when to exceed or kind of lining that up with using a big attack that pops your ice spikes, that can be pretty relevant.
Okay.
It's not really a particularly special or mechanically different exceed like some of the other characters, but it's kind of nuanced because of that.
And one extra power might not seem like a lot, but if anybody who's ever played Akuma or watched the Akuma guide knows, the difference between exceed side Akuma and front side Akuma is pretty immense. Polar Knight having a little bit of extra power can make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 2 printed 5s, which 7 and 8 is a big difference, and you've got a couple 4s on the normals and on Snow Slash. Though Snow Slash, if it breaks sweep, then something has gone horribly wrong because you have plus a lot of speed somewhere, which is unusual.
And when we're talking about the normals interactions, just as an example of why +3 is a lot more than +2 for people who don't know and haven't watched that particular guide. Where's my grasp? There it is. If you put +2 power onto an on-curve assault at range 3, it still will not break sweep. And the normals are very carefully tuned to allow that to happen, to make sure that you are not ever one boost away from overturning a slow beating a fast interaction. +3 power, all of a sudden that doesn't happen anymore, and that sweep that your opponent is playing is now much, much harder to use. So having +3 power at all is a really, really big deal to a character.
Yep, and you just have it. Just do it.
When we're talking about this, just as we're evaluating, like, how do I put this? This is not at will, right? I have it. It's on my character. It's not even like a resource I have to spend. I don't have to spend gauge to have the +3 power or something. But it is like, it's not every single turn. If there's no ice spikes on the board, I don't get it at all. So when we're evaluating these cards, how often should I be factoring in the fact that I have ice spikes down? Like how frequently can I actually realistically take advantage of this ability?
It's usually going to come up like a couple times a game. If it's coming up on every strike, then you probably won. So Icicle Drop, it'll always come up, right? Like it only hits if they're on an ice spike. So Icicle Drop basically just has more power than it looks.
Actually hits for 10 or 11, right?
Yeah. Polar Plow will typically, or sorry, not Polar Plow. Shovel Slam will typically get an ice spike because it has some movement. Shovel Charge tends to. The other ones are a little harder to wrangle, and obviously we'll talk about it more in Counterplay, but Focus is extremely important against Polar.
Keep you from being pulled, sure. Pushed or pulled.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a huge deal.
And then among the normals, the only one that actually moves the opponent is Grasp.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of complicated. Like it depends a lot on what the character the opponent's playing. If they play a character that moves a lot, like has forced movement on a lot of their kit, they will tend to be in danger more. Because you can't, if they stay still and they have extra like can't be pushed, for example, it's less likely that they will be ice spiked because you can't put it on their space easily.
Right.
If they move a lot, then most characters don't have a lot of flexible movement. Just Exceed doesn't really do that. So, and by flexible movement, I mean like advance 3 or 4 in a single, like on a strike type attack.
Advance up to 3 after effect or something like that. That's
those are pretty rare.
Common.
It's usually forced movement.
Right. And sometimes, even in that situation, they play, if we're talking about like what's another ice character, Jin's the after on his fireball. If I've got stuff like this, though, they might not have a choice sometimes, but to advance into my stuff. But that's still harder than if they're constantly darting around and can't control where they're going.
Yeah, and you can also sort of set it up that if the opponent's a zoner, you can kind of set up a space further away from you where you basically say you can fight me here, but you're going to have to risk higher ice spikes. If they're a melee fighter, then you can do the opposite, set up, near you. It's really depends on how you want to play it with the opponent's character. Like it's a mix of what you think is most likely and what you think makes the opponent take the most risks, right?
Okay, I see. That makes sense.
It also might depend on how many ice spikes you have access to. Like in the very early game, when you're placing an ice spike, your opponent, being Ryu, can pretty much always say, "Okay, I'm Ryu. I'll just take the move action."
Right.
But when you've got like 4 ice spikes down, it could be that Ryu's in the middle of a carpet of ice spikes and he has to move 3 to get out.
Right.
So,
Could you also do situations like I'm dealing with a character who has a really, really scary ultra or something that I know they're threatening and is going to move them into. Is it also like a denial tool? Can I say like, all right, I on an earlier turn, I grasp the air because I don't have anything to deal with your aggression. I put something in front of me, and now if you want to do your cool attack, you're going to have to play in my spot.
I would generally say no, because ice spikes aren't inherently that scary. Generally, if the opponent is going to be threatening something like that, it's probably on their attack. At which point, like your cards
have
aren't
to not
actually
get
that
stunned
much.
to
Yeah, like
actually hit back.
but it's important that you can be in a situation where your ice spike lets you enable avalanche or snow slash, because both of your ultras are kind of like cheaty trade denial tools that might be unusually, and also stomp. Like these are your 3 like mess with the opponent cards in a lot of ways.
Okay.
So you can like if Stomp has 0 power, it's just a push. If Stomp has 2 or 3 power, it's a true DP.
Right.
And that gets enabled by the kind of thing that you're saying, where you just put an ice spike down, maybe it's 2 behind them or on the space 2 away from you, where now they have to actually respect.
Now you're threatening something.
Yeah.
I get you. Okay.
Like
Should
Stomp, for
we?
example, in an interaction with like Kentatsu, right, where it doesn't have guard, but it's got big range. And you're like kind of slow, so Kentatsu is pretty scary against you. If you're throwing extra power on there, it's just it covers a lot more than if it's just a push.
It's just a push. It's not going to deny as many things as if you might also stun something.
Exactly.
Okay. Should we get into the kit itself then?
Sure. So
Yeah.
let's see.
Yeah, where do we want to start?
Let's start with Stomp. I feel like Stomp it's on the left and it's a pretty interesting card.
Okay.
Do you have a specific one, Rose, that you were thinking of?
No, let's go left to right. Why not?
All right.
Or
Stomp. It's one of the weirdest DPs in the game.
I would say it's a pretty good one though.
It is. It's a great card. It's just weird. So Stomp was so if you remember earlier, I described him as a like somewhere between heavy and super heavy.
Right.
Stomp is the very rare fast attack on a heavy. It's above curve in a way that is kind of scary when you have access to power. But 0 printed power is rough. The main thing about Stomp that's important is its hit effect, and it's a really good one.
Okay.
So Stomp does 2 things. So first, it pushes 2, and then it lets you remove a spike within 1 space to gain advantage. It's pretty rare to have a DP with advantage in the game.
Yeah.
I can think of very few, and that means that you can do some pretty silly advantage chains with Stomp. The downside, of course,
there's not going to be a lot like Assault is a great advantage gainer and it's on curve. There's not a lot that somebody can do to stop getting hit by an above curve move. You are very likely going to gain advantage when you do this.
Yeah, and not only does it gain advantage, it potentially deals a good amount of damage. If it deals 2 or 3, that's pretty good for an above curve advantage chain, and it pushes 2, which means that slows that aren't focus, if you do it at range 2, like sweep or spike or whatever, are going to miss.
This is a DP. This is a DP that beats sweep even without an ice spike, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
Okay.
So you need a guarded move in order to cover the ice spike condition with 4 range. And
Like
that's,
a
that
Tatsu.
yeah, like a
Basically,
Tatsu.
exactly a Tatsu.
Yeah. Basically, what you just described is something that not every character has.
And it's worth noting, of course, that most Tatsus have kind of a middling amount of guard, right? They're meant to be like counterattacks. They're not meant to be true slows.
Right.
And Polar Knight is a character that can absolutely crush middling amounts of guard.
Yes.
So if you specifically counterplay Stomp, you might be taking your life into your own hands
With every other
'cause-
card in his kit.
Yeah, especially Shovel Slam is kind of the archetype card there because that's a really powerful mid speed. But
okay.
Shovel Charge will wreck Tatsus because it usually hits for 5, and you draw some cards. You're brave if you Tatsu Stomp potentially.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. Yeah, just to make sure I'm understanding some stuff right. I do this from 2. The hit effect on Stomp is not something that I can reorder, right? This is in order.
Correct.
I push 2 and then I can remove it. So if this doesn't exist, I'm not getting advantage out of Stomp here.
Correct.
Because I will push 2, and then if there is something here or I push them onto it, then I can do it. But also, if I remove or adjacent to, okay. But so if I push them, if they're here and I push them directly onto it, I could use my character ability to remove it and do +2. Or I could use Stomp to remove it and get advantage, but not both.
Exactly.
Unless there was another ice spike here or another ice spike here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a pattern you'll see a couple of times. This is a ability that lets you remove ice spikes for benefit. And usually those require removing something that's in a specific spot.
Right. Okay. What about if it was a situation like this? Now I Stomp.
Then you're good.
Hit effect from this goes away. They get pushed. Hit effect from Stomp. This gets removed. I get advantage.
That's fine. Yeah, that's allowed.
Got it. Okay.
And then you put 1 in Stomp range.
Right. Okay.
Stomp also tracks the trend of having like a specifically push 2 is kind of the most common push he's got. Shovel Charge is up to 2 and drop is push or pull 1, but because of positioning weirdness, it'll often end up being a push 2 in effective movement.
Okay.
So being
no
slash as well. So like being 2 in front of a ice spike can be kind of dangerous if it's like this. Can be a pretty risky spot to be in.
Same with this. Same with this.
Anything less so, like because again, these both hit at range 2.
Range 2 specifically is powerful. Okay, but and closer up, just those 2 relative to each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like to visualize Stomp as he like stomps the ground, you get pushed back, and then the ice spike is like behind you, so the advantage is like you getting knocked into the spike that's already there.
And reuse like, oh man, my head, because he's been dazed by it, and now Polar Knight's already jumping on top of him or something.
Yeah, it's like if you've seen lingering projectiles in fighting games, right, where like you do a thing and then they kind of bounce into the projectile and they have to block it for a second. It's like that.
Right. It's frame advantage. Okay, it's almost like the name advantage is on the effect. I gotcha.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's I think that's covers most of Stomp. It's really good. It's also your only card that's above curve or even really on curve. Like Shovel Charge is on curve, but Shovel Charge is a really funky card. So you can save it to use as a DP. You can throw it as part of an advantage chain. You can use it for a kill combo because you can crank it up to 5 power, and then it's 1 to 2, 5, 7, which is pretty nice.
That's a good stat line.
It's Inferno Divider with extra steps, if I recall correctly.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
It does a lot, but because it does so much, it's a card you have to be kind of careful about because it's the only thing that does that.
Okay, that makes sense. Rose, anything to add about Stomp?
Andarel covered basically everything. I will say this is a lot worse than most DPs at range 1, because at range 1 a DP can still call out a mid speed. This one you need the ice spike setup to.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right.
The fact that
they wild swing an assault under curve, and there's no ice spike back here.
Is here.
they come back in and they hit you anyway, and you're sad.
Yeah. It's also worth kind of as a meta thing. Like Polar Knight is kind of gauge hungry, but he's not like gauge starved. He's not he's not one of those characters that loves gauge and has an amazing use for it. He's like
he has
decent
great
at
things to do
getting
with gauge, but he only spends it in a couple places.
Yeah, and he generates like a reasonable amount per game. So like getting that free gauge, like Carl Swanji, for example, might just throw coffee to get a gauge because he wants it so badly.
With
You're not really using Stomp for the gauge.
Stomp,
It's not
despite being a very, very likely to hit card, you want it to be a DP or you want it to set up a kill. All of the use cases you listed, it gets you gauge, but that's probably not what you should use it for.
exactly.
I gotcha.
Yeah, you're not like coffee is kind of the example where you might just chuck that for a gauge.
Right.
You need the gauge so badly.
For people who are not familiar with this particular character, Carl from Automata has his one projectile. He's a very grappler character. His one projectile is he just hucks a coffee cup at you, and it's very likely to hit. It's like 6 speed, I think.
Yeah, it's 3 to 6, 1 6, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do very much damage, but it definitely gets you a gauge, and he really wants that. So Stomp is not like that. Should we move right on to Shovel Charge?
Sure. Let's actually.
Unless we want to talk about Reach first.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's do boosts as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will say Reach is, I think, generally kind of expensive. Like it's cost of force. It doesn't necessarily always feel like, oh, I'm getting a full force. Like for Polar Knight in particular, Reach is really nice because you, as Andarel said earlier, don't have a lot of ways to cheat speed or range or anything of that. This is your one boost that makes your attacks easier to hit, as far as I am aware.
Right.
That's all you got.
And speed and range and exceed, it's come up a couple times on previous lessons. They're kind of fungible. Like this doesn't make your this doesn't make your assault faster, but it does allow it to hit at a place where 5 is breaking the speed limit instead of just barely getting up to the speed limit. So you can use it to confirm a poke one space out from where you normally would. You can use it to play the range 3 mix up at range 4, for example.
Yeah, there's a little bit of weirdness also in that his kit. So Shovel Charge obviously likes Reach because it's assault shaped. Stomp, doing like Reach Stomp is fine if it wins you the game, but if not, it's really expensive.
Yes,
right.
You spend both stomps for that. Yep.
And Stomp is like your biggest defensive tool, arguably. Shovel Slam with Reach is terrifying, but again, it's really expensive because you just spent 2 force. Because it's a force special.
Oh, it's a force special. Okay, yeah.
So you're like spending a lot. You're spending 3 cards for +1 range Shovel Slam. But +1 range Shovel Slam might just be a free 8-ish damage. So take that as you will.
Right.
If you reach Polar Plow, then I'm impressed.
In that situation, it would be really funny because Polar Plow is 1 range short of hitting edge.
It's true. I can think of a situation in which it would come up, but I've never had it happen. Yeah.
Yes.
Reach Shovel Drop is a thing that we should talk about at length when we talk about Shovel Drop because it's actually really relevant.
Yes.
Okay. And it's more relevant to Shovel Drop specifically because this thing is basically a range 2 to 5 or 2 to 4 attack, but giving it +0 to 1 range makes it a 1 to 5 because of the way it moves. So like Reach Shovel Drop is a lot scarier than Shovel Drop.
It's like putting Reach on Dive. It shores up some of the range shadow instead of making it farther. I get you. Okay, so you can use it at range 1.
Yeah, Reach Icicle Drop does literally nothing.
It lets you hit somebody if you're in a lobby though. It lets you hit somebody over here, on another board of the game.
Damn, I wish that worked. It's a magic card that does that.
Yeah.
But it's banned. And then Reach Snow Slash is like.
I guess you don't lose to Grasp now, but I'm usually playing this card on defense, which isn't compatible with Reach.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's really important. So one of the big things that's relevant at Polar Knight is that Polar Knight is got that Season 6 blessing of all of your footsies tools force you to strike. So he is very bad at like boost go or like boost pass, right? Your only stat boost that doesn't make you strike is block And as Rose just mentioned, you kind of get that same effect by just playing Snow Slash. Like Blockhand is not bad, but it's very specific, and so it's not just like a generic footsies boost that you're going to play.
And other than your season 1 through 5 normals boosts, you've got your defense, you've got your fierce, you got your light, but those are not in your kit. They're everything else. You got reach is now strike, you got overpower is now strike.
The closest thing you'll get to just putting stats down and passing your turn is this boost on Shattering Stomp, which I have been told in advance that we're going to argue over this card, so I'm excited about that.
Really? All right. I will start the fireworks when we get there.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, so that's one of like the big weaknesses for Polar is quite bad at like conventional boost neutral, just because he doesn't have any. He will explode you, but you may be well served by just trying to mix up your way out of a boost situation. And if you look at his guard numbers, he can take a hit, but he can't really take like a fierce hit that reliably.
Right. As soon as I'm fighting Soul Bad Guy, who can reliably say like I have 8 power, you're gonna have to hold that. Suddenly, my guard numbers are looking a little bit more flimsy than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah, I mean, when Soul Bad Guy throws his mix up and you stomp him, like literally, not metaphorically,
then you feel pretty good.
Yeah, or you have a stun immunity, your Vesicle drop, but like those are your specific call out buttons, and they're kind of...
Hence why this is one of your best defensive tools.
Yeah,
and hence
probably your most important defensive tool.
And to sort of close back to what we were talking about a second ago, hence why reach is not always what you want, because plus range actually would make a lot of things better defensively, and you can't use it that way.
Yep. And this is already, as Sandra was saying, a card that does a lot of things that you only get from this card. So you're sacrificing that for reach.
So it makes it makes it pretty tough to play reach. That makes sense. Okay.
Yep. And what's notable actually is that like your range is on your rangey card, and your armor is on your armory card when it comes to boosts, right? So unlike the normal boosts where like they kind of shore each other up, right? Like Sweep has your speed boost and Grasp has your power boost.
Right.
Polar doesn't have that. If he wants plus range, he either boosts for it or he plays the card that actually has it, and they're on the same card.
Strikes. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So he's got to like really make a choice. Once he's played it, that aspect of his kit is kind of just gone.
Yeah, and at the same time, like he doesn't have to he doesn't have to make a decision about whether he wants to use this card to get some kind of range. That's going to happen anyway. But he doesn't have any redundancy with it. It's going to be this or one side or another of this. That makes sense.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I describe as like the boss character paradigm, right? Like you have these really cheating cards, but they're set up such that your kit like forces you to kind of make hard decisions around it.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Shall we talk about Shovel Charge and begin arguing?
Yeah. So the thing about Shovel Charge is that Shovel Charge is a card that when I first started playing him, I was always like, oh, I just boost Shattering Stomp. This card rules. And then like over the time playing him, I have found myself in so many situations where I just want to play Shovel Charge. This card's upside of drawing potentially 3 cards is super high because of the way that Polar Knight's economy works.
Okay.
And the reason for that, this man has force costs, right? He's got 3 boosts that cost a force. He's also got a force special. He's fine for pairing, but like he doesn't love it.
Right.
You only have really 2 economy in your kit. You've got hitting with Shovel Charge, and you've got boosting Rebuild. And Rebuild, we could talk for a while about Rebuild. This card is bonkers.
Right.
This boost is bonkers. But hitting Shovel Charge reduces the stress on Rebuild as like your economy in your kit, if that makes sense.
You were also saying that he requires using, maybe like for fine positioning, might require using the move action more than the average character would.
Exactly.
So not only is his economy, his ability to draw cards kind of bad, he needs those cards to move around, and he might not have them.
And he's also not like a very good passive set play character where you like boost go, as we just mentioned. So like you don't have that kind of stream of cards. If you often want to strike with him.
Right. Okay. So
he's got a bunch of like little nuanced economy taxes, and Shovel Charge is an assault that draws you 3 cards with 1 fewer power and pushes them onto an ice spike. So it's
also
a really
flexible
scary
push, which is cool.
Oh yeah. So this isn't a push 2. This is a push up to 2. Okay. So
yep.
In this situation, basically, if there is an ice spike already on my opponent, if there's one behind him, if there's one behind 2 of them, I could get the removal at any point. But also, if there's two behind him, I'm drawing a card for every one of them.
Yep. If I recall correctly, this attack in the video game is the one where he just kind of winds up and then runs forward and tries to shove you into as many spikes as he can on the bottom of the board,
Right.
or on the bottom of the screen. It's a very kind of iconic attack for him.
So, unlike Stomp, though, it doesn't really seem like there's. It's not like I'm torn between. Oh, do I want the advantage or do I want the damage? I could get both because the card draw doesn't require me to remove the ice spike.
Oh yeah, it's all upside.
Okay,
Stomp
awesome.
Shovel Charge is great. The downside is that you're giving up Shattering Stomp, which is a very good boost.
So I think the side of the argument I'm supposed to be on, based on what I wrote and Andarel saw I'd written, is that Shattering Stomp's amazing. I love this boost. I boost this a lot just because, like we were saying, you don't have that much to boost in neutral, and sometimes you need to do something in neutral, and this is there for you.
Yeah.
I will say, though, to add to Andarel's point, this is also an Assault-like, which is just like a valuable thing to have because everyone's always afraid of EX Assault. This is a second copy of EX Assault if you need it to be as well.
Sure.
Like, that matters.
Yeah, it's another on-curve defensive option that you don't have a lot of, and this one pushes 2 and dodges sweep just like this one would.
Well, not dodges, because you have to be at range 1 to hit with it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, man, but reach EX Shovel Charge, Rose.
I mean, that
would be a really scary attack, honestly.
That's pretty scary, yeah. You got, that's what, in Exceed mode, that's 1 to 4, 6, 5, draw some cards to refund the reach.
Draw some cards to subsidize the cost. Yeah, it's like I've done like 42 of these lessons. I'm learning something.
Yeah, no, Shovel Charge is a cool card.
The arguments for Shattering Stomp and against Shattering Stomp, in my mind, are like, you already place a lot of ice spikes just by virtue of playing the game natively, so you don't need necessarily to commit to placing more by playing this boost. But until you exceed, this, other than exceeding, and one really expensive option, which we'll talk about later, is your way to place an ice spike on the opponent's space directly.
Right.
Which I value pretty highly.
That's the value.
Is this something that, like, because I've played a little bit of Polar Knight because I like the cut of his jib, and I crutch on Shattering Stomp like crazy, but I think it's probably because I'm not very good at doing all of his tricks to maintain position and threaten somebody to make them stand onto an ice spike or something like that. So I'm like, man, they won't stand on my ice spikes. This is a great way to do it. Is that kind of like, will that, as I get better at Polar Knight, will that urge to just have the easy way out be less important because I'll have more ability to control where my opponent is? Or is it more like, as I'm playing better opponents, I'm just going to need Shattering Stomp just as much as I do now?
It never really goes away. Like, especially early game when you don't have that many ice spikes, Shattering Stomp is real tempting.
Yeah, I will say that. It is, when I play Shattering Stomp, it's often like the very first couple turns of the game, and if I draw this card much later in the game, I probably don't need it anywhere near as badly for the boost. Though, even then, it is really flexible position.
Yeah.
And at that point, Shovel Charge becomes a much more valuable economic upside when there are some ice spikes on the board. So, like, early game Shattering Stomp, mid to late game Shovel Charge might be kind of a useful shortcut for this card.
Yeah, I think that's the best heuristic for it. It's also got some weird interactions again with Rebuild in that, like, if you have stuff that removes your ice spikes, you might be more likely to play Shattering Stomp. Because of that, like, weird ebb and flow of, like, ice spikes versus economy that we'll get to when we talk about Avalanche or Icicle Drop.
Okay.
But yeah, like, it's an interesting card. And I think kind of the thing that I was saying that I think I might disagree on is just like how much you should be really trying to play it, because Shattering Stomp is a safe default. It's a great boost. It's consistently really good. But like, as I've played Polar more, I found myself playing it less and less because setting up Shovel Charge can have really good upsides.
Yeah, I mean, and then like looking back at the ability itself, this is also in some ways a lot more synergistic with the kit than Assault, because I could go in, I could Assault here, I could hit for 6 damage, that's great. And then it's my turn and they're not on an ice spike. Which, again, we have ways to deal with, but
yeah,
for Shovel Charge, even if you don't get an advantage, in the exact same situation, I can go in here, I can remove this ice spike, I can hit for 5 damage, push them to draw 2 cards rather, right? Yes.
Potentially, yeah.
And then also, they're
Put
still
it-
on an ice spike, even though now it's their turn.
And then you
Yeah.
put
So-
another one down, and you can continue threatening it.
Yeah, though Assault is also really synergistic because if you hit them, you deal 6 or 7 at range 1, and now that extra power is really relevant once you've exceeded, especially.
Yeah.
And now they're risking the like grasp shovel slam mix up, possibly for game.
That's
Off of your
true. I guess,
advantage.
there's reasons to do either side.
And you also have a natural cross, arguably multiple natural cross counters with Polar Plow and Stomp. So that gives you a lot of leeway to deal with stuff.
To make sure that people actually have to participate in those mix-ups.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool.
But
should
yeah,
we
Shovel Charge, great card.
should we move on to Shovel Slam?
Yeah.
Sure.
The big scary
it
mid-speed.
hurts. It hurts.
This is a mid-speed 4 special, and that's for a reason. This is a really terrifying mid-speed to get hit with. The hit effect often says that you get to pop an ice spike even if you weren't originally going to, though in practice it's a little finicky sometimes to get them onto an ice spike with it.
You may remove an ice spike from a space adjacent to the opponent to push or pull 1. So similar thing to Stomp, where I can, except it can't be underneath them.
So if it's
I-
underneath, you don't really need that effect.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Then why
exactly.
would you? Well, unless you're trying to like dodge something, I guess. But even then, it's
Yeah, in a situation like this one you're laying out right here,
right.
then
Yep,
Shovel
so-
Slam lets you pop an ice spike.
Okay.
Yeah, so this
okay.
card basically means that it's scary for the opponent to stand in between 2 ice spikes, or if you are in this situation also,
Yep.
right? Because then you can pull 1 and get them onto the ice
Oh,
spike.
right. Sure. Okay. So
and this-
one, yeah.
And this was actually extra scary because of the after, because you do that, you pull this, right? You pull them onto here, pop this ice spike, hit for 7 or 8, they probably get stunned, and then after, place an ice spike in a space adjacent, which doesn't have to be unoccupied.
Doesn't say it has to be an unoccupied space. So now you're able to here, let me get view. So you don't need to capitalize on your own aggression to I'm going to put a boost behind me or something.
Yeah, or as we mentioned earlier, you can put it here.
Behind them so that now you're threatening Stomp or one of your other push 2s.
Yep.
But yeah, with Shovel Slam, you don't have to make that choice, because this is also in addition to your default after. So you place one right under them, and you put one right here.
Oh.
And now you're set up for everything, basically.
Oh wow. Okay. So and again, it's trigger ordering. So God, that's a lot of upside. And hence what you're saying. You've got your 4 special mid speed. It's got 3 guard on it. That is not super safe.
Well, 3 guard and 1 to 3 range means grasp.
Grasp can't stop it.
Which is really what it's there for. And some
Okay.
other like fast pokey specials, like there's a lot of 3 power DPs
Sure.
that you might have to deal with. So yeah, they can just assault you in the face, but
Right.
again, like that can be really dangerous. So this is the kind of card where you're forcing them to call it out, because if you just like if they're on an ice spike and if you're exceeded, like it crushes focus, right? 5+3 is enough to crush focus.
Yeah, that's not super common for something that requires no boosts down first. Like that's
Yep.
sometimes there's like an ignore guard, ignore armor clause somewhere in there, but you can just beat it with damage.
Yeah, even I want to say the most comparable cards are like Taker Driver kind of fills a similar role, and like that beats Sweep, that doesn't beat Focus, or like
Right.
Potbuster,
Right.
where I think Potbuster is what, base 5 or 6?
Base 6.
Base
Base
6,
6.
yeah.
So exceeded Potbuster crushes Focus.
Right.
But
But
it
yeah.
pays for that in, I think it's
In
speed
other
lower.
ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got the armor, but it beats Grasp in a different way. Like
Well,
it does
and
other stuff.
This is a range 1 to 3, that's 1 to 2, and really it's range 1 for what you're talking about. There's a lot of
Exactly.
flexibility on this card. There's a lot of, and like the situation that I just set up is one of, I'm sure, many, many, many ways to make Shovel Slam get what it wants. It's not only is it threatening, it's flexible.
Yeah, but it's expensive, right? Your economy is already not the best, and it's a
Right.
4 special. And when it loses, it tends to lose fairly hard.
And it's taking
And your
two.
opponent wants to beat it because it's so scary. This is your highest damaging special. Polar Plow
Right.
also says 5, but it's
kind of a lie.
kind of a lower 5 than
Yeah.
5.
So it's a 5 minus instead of 5 plus.
5 plus, yeah. And this is also taking up 2 ice spikes, although I assume if I'm getting the value I'm getting out of it, the ice spikes are worth it, right?
It's taking 2, but it's placing 2.
It's placing 2. Okay, so I'm going ice spike neutral. In general, as I'm evaluating Polar Knight stuff, are there ever times when I shouldn't be popping ice spikes? Like when I stomp, for example, if I could get the advantage and get the damage, I should just be getting both. I shouldn't.
I think that's usually a safe heuristic. You might, if you think that the opponent is going to be forced to like prep, for example, or something, and the ice spike is on top of them, so you have a follow up that you can just do through the prep, then like maybe you leave the ice spike, especially if you're exceeded. But I would usually pop the ice spike.
It would have to be something. I have seen game specific situations where you wouldn't, but you would have to have a really concrete reason that you would probably know about.
Okay. So don't value using or don't value preserving your ice spikes too highly if you can get good value out of them.
Yeah, they're meant to be just like a thing that exists, and you shove the opponent through them, like, you know, that like anime character style, grabbing their head and like pushing them through a wall.
Pushing them through a wall, sure. Yeah, I gotcha.
Shovel slam, you know, if you want to move them, then great. If they're already on an ice spike, then like maybe don't pop it. But at the same time, maybe you want the positioning. Like that's more of a choice, I would say.
Right. Okay.
So, for example, if you're in a situation like this, I don't know why my ice spikes are not.
Yeah, here.
rotating.
That's a weird one. Let me help you out.
So if you're in this position, right, then you probably pop this ice spike.
Do damage.
Do the extra damage, so you hit them for 7 or 8, and then like maybe you pop this one to pull them 1, and then place a new ice spike in their space. But also maybe you don't, because like 2 is a reasonable range for you. Because of stomp and
right. And now suddenly if there's another ice spike back here, my math changes. If I'm in the corner, my math changes. There's plenty of ways that this doesn't.
It's very game specific, but like that's the kind of time where it's more of a choice, because like that one you're getting it right back anyways.
Right.
And of course, if both spaces next to you have ice spikes, then you would fail to use the drop one. So then maybe you just pop it.
You pop it so that you can drop another one. Yeah.
Like don't actually treat that as like getting value out of your effects if the positioning is not better for you. Like placing an extra ice spike is not worth screwing up your positioning.
Right.
But grasp is terrifying, so like people will respect grasp pretty heavily.
Yep.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So what possible boost could stand up to Shovel Slam?
A boost that you play. I'll tell you that much.
Advance on Shovel Slam really briefly.
Please go ahead, Rose.
Yeah, go for it.
I value the EX on this card pretty highly, because this isn't the card that if you hit once with this card, you're in a pretty good spot. You don't need to rely on playing this like multiple times a game. And the EX makes it on curve, makes it not lose to a lot of things that beat the random free guard. Certainly, like, this is a good mix-up option without the EX. Like, you have to represent it. Your opponent has to play around it, so definitely don't only play an EX. But if you have the EX, that's probably an EX that's worth playing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only reason that I would not play the EX is if I thought I really needed to hold the boost. And like that's some real opportunity cost, because the EX is realistically going to be 8 or 9 damage consistently.
Yep.
Which is, you know.
Yeah, that's again. I've said it a couple times. You're not supposed to have numbers that high and exceed.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's also not an ultra, which is notable.
Yeah,
like
that's a 4 special with no boost. It's hitting for 8 or 9
on curve.
Yeah, that's too many numbers.
You're Polar Knight. You like red number.
Yeah, red number good. Rose has several characters that I've talked to Rose.
Yeah,
with.
Seems like a pattern. I don't know.
you really like big red numbers, Rose. Tell me a little bit about dashing through. Another number that you don't see very often. Advance to retreat up to 6.
It's the Carl Swanji classic, right? He's got a close 6, I think.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Headlong run. And it's a very similar reason. Like, these are kind of immobile characters, but when they need to move, they need to haul butt into the correct position.
Right.
The downside is usually it's on an important
A
card.
card you really don't want to give up. Yeah.
And in Polar's case, because Polar's movement is a little more flexible, it also has an additional downside, which is to remove the first 2 ice spikes you move on to.
Okay.
Which I think is actually also from the video game. I think he has a move where he runs forward
Where
and
he
breaks the ice spikes in his
he
wake.
breaks his own spikes. Yeah.
I was always imagining it was, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. Like, he runs forward and he breaks them as he goes. That's like the way that the screen clears up in the video game. But yeah, this boost is kind of self-explanatory. You're pretty positioning sensitive, but like a lot of it is you're imposing your range on the opponent more than moving yourself. But like sometimes you got to move, and this means that you can. But removing 2 ice spikes is a pretty real cost for no benefit. That hurts.
And if you can afford to not use this boost, like if you can move with run or backstep, though you're not backstepping very often,
or the move action or something. Yeah, I mean it's tough to lose 2 ice spikes. It also sounds like it's really tough to lose shovel slam.
Yeah, though you don't need to land shovel slam to win the game. You have plenty of red number in your kit. This is just the reddest number you have.
This is just one very big scary one.
Yeah.
Yep. So I will say, so again, given I'm saying for shorter movements you want to use like normal boosts or the move action rather than this. If you have to move the full 6, removing the ice spikes is a cost because we keep alluding to rebuild. But when you are 6 away from the opponent and you're advancing 6, these ice spikes probably are not immediately doing anything for you.
Sure.
So like it matters, but it mattered a lot more if you use this to move like 2.
And you're fairly unlikely to be using it to move the full 6 to get to like over here. Like you generally want to be fairly close to your opponent.
Yeah, if you made this boost say close up this or advance up to 6 and took out the retreat part, I don't think it would have changed any of the games I've actually played.
Kind of the same.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. The retreat was mostly there just to make it a little more flexible because I can see situations where you use it to like as a second backstep to go from 1 to 4 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But like it's not it's an advance most of the time.
Is it safe to sum up play shovel slam when you can, boost dashing through when you have to?
Yeah, I mean, or don't play shovel slam, right? Like threaten shovel slam, and then sometimes you have to play it.
Right, and dashing through removes the opportunity to play and threaten shovel slam.
Yeah.
Okay.
And possibly other stuff too, depending on which spikes you smash in the process.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. How about Polar Plow?
Sure is an opener.
Yeah, 1 to 7. Here, let's move some spikes.
Not a lot of 1 to 7 sweeps in the game.
There's not a lot of these. This is the first time I'm seeing a lot of numbers.
So Polar Plow is a weird card because the card kind of lies to you. Polar Plow's a big card. It's an excellent opener. And it is a card that you will play over the course of the game in a bunch of situations. It's one of the most reliable cards possibly in Exceed because it's got 6 guard and full board range and respectable power.
Right.
The first line of text is the downside, which I see you're setting up for.
Yep. So in this situation, assuming my opponent doesn't move in, I'm hitting for 2.
Correct.
If they dive at me, we are
for 7.
I'm trading up because they did the 5. I don't get stunned. They're on an ice spike. This says between you and the opponent, not inclusive of the one they're on.
Yep, exactly.
These 2 don't count. This one doesn't count. I pop this one as my hit effect. I'm hitting for 7.
Yep.
Okay.
The other nice thing about this range, which is a little more subtle, is that the way your ability works, this range lets you place your ice spike basically anywhere.
Right. Yeah, anywhere except underneath them. So I could, if they dove in. These aren't here. You said, Andarel, it's a good opener. They dive in, I play Polar Plow. We trade even for 5. Except I put it 2 behind them because I know from everything else you've been saying that putting it 2 behind them is scary.
Yep. Yeah, it also closes 3, which means that as an opener, they can focus or sweep it, and they'll trade up.
Yep.
That's really the only downside, unless they have, like, you're not... This card's existence makes it very risky, whether Polar Knight is striking or not, or defending, to play like the kind of fast dive shape into him,
or even like a fast projectile.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And honestly, it does fine into slow projectiles too, because it'll some of those are slow enough that it might even outspeed them.
Ways to get around this penalty on this card, because slows, a lot of the value slows, they do need to hit hard enough to be worth being counter hit.
Sure.
So if you're hitting for like 3 damage with this, even if you pop an ice spike, that still might not be worth it. Play it at range 1. They can't cross out of this. They'd have to cross twice, and you'd still hit them.
Right. Right.
Play it early game, like Andarel was saying, before the board is completely clogged with ice spikes. This before effect, which I don't know if we actually mentioned yet, is a reward for cornering the opponent. In a situation like this, Polar Plow might look like it's hitting for 4. It's actually hitting for 7, because this ice spike gets removed before the calculation. It gets moved over here. And then you can pop it for your ability.
So wait, hold up. So this is a passive effect. -1 power for each ice spike between you and the opponent. But the power doesn't happen until I'm actually dealing the power doesn't, because it's a passive effect, it doesn't matter until I'm actually dealing the damage. So
Yes.
before effect, if the opponent's at the edge of the arena, they are. I put an ice spike on them.
Yep.
Now, okay, calculate power. There's no ice spikes between my opponent and me. Polar Plow hits for its regular amount of 5. Hit effect, take out the ice spike to deal 7.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, it hurts.
And then
it's a good card.
Okay.
It's one of his scariest cards in it's kind of the opposite of Shovel Slam. Shovel Slam is, a little bit unreliable, but it hits really hard. This card, it can hit hard. It caps out at 8, which is a lot, but it often won't.
Right.
The main thing is that it's quite reliable. It'll beat a lot of things that the opponent might try and evade you on, because a lot of your moves do have kind of specific ranges.
Right.
In that 1 to 3, 1 to 2, 1 to 3 band especially.
Am I mulling for this?
You don't need to, but it doesn't hurt. I'm not sad.
Okay.
If your heuristic is mulligan for Shovel Charge and Polar Plow, I think you'll do fine.
Makes sense. Okay, so you've
Shovel
got
Charge for the boost and Polar Plow for the strike.
Yeah, you've got a good early game boost. You got a good early game attack. That makes
mulling
sense.
for Shovel Slam is not great, because even it's a mix up, but you have to kind of get into that position with ice spikes down, so that's not great.
Right.
Mulling for Shovel Drop is fine, because it does beat a lot of openers. But it's not we'll talk about that in a second. But it's not a great, because it loses the dive. But Polar Plow it trades with dive. It loses if you strike with it. It loses to sweep and focus. If they strike with sweep, then they're brave.
They're calling it out. So good defensive. I mean, honestly, having this in your hand means that you're pretty safe to do other things on your opening turn other than strike if you wanted to.
Yeah. If they strike into you with sweep to try and catch it fast, then I don't know who they think they're playing, because it loses to this, it loses to this.
Right.
And nothing else hits. It's specifically calling out dive.
Right.
And honestly, the opponent striking turn 1 with focus, I consider that a win. That got a focus down.
Sure.
And I only traded one power for it. Focus is a big deal against this character.
Right, yeah, you really want to be able to push and pull. Okay. What about overpower?
Well, it does change the game. The difference between 2 and 3 is big. The difference between 2, 3, and 4 or 5 is substantial.
Yeah, it is. That's a bigger number.
If the opponent is being threatened by an ice spike, overpower is basically guaranteed stun, right? That's a minimum of +4.
Yeah.
Which even on your weakest card, which is not counting stomp, is Shovel Charge. That means you're hitting for 7.
Right.
Shovel Drop is also 3, but it ignores armor, and so you're hitting for 7, ignore armor.
Yeah.
Nothing defends against that really without cranking up boosts, and overpower is not a fierce plus power pass turn situation. It's you're just doing it.
Right.
So it's a combo card, right? You play it because you think you're in a situation where their defenses are all down. It's your reward for getting rid of their defensive tools more than anything else.
Okay.
Because it's quite expensive. You're giving up a very reliable card to do it, but you're hitting real hard, and that's how Polar wins. So.
Right. And because of how big the damage numbers are, you're not looking to put this on. Like, I mean, it'd be really nice if I corner them with sweep and hit for 11 or whatever. But if I'm trying to stun a focus, 8's enough, right? I don't need to hit for too much more than that. So I don't need to put it on a super unreliable card. I could just put this on a assault, a poke it,
Yeah, the
range
exception is
3
going to be like spike or shovel drop, or if you like want to do a specific ignore armor type play.
in order to stop the block, sure. But then I'm to your point about defensive options. Do they have a whirl? Do they have a DP when I'm doing this at range 2? What do they have that can actually deal with overpower when I'm playing just an on curve attack?
Yep. Rose, you
Okay.
were saying something?
I don't remember. I have a couple things I can say, but I don't remember what specifically I was just saying. I think this boost is on this attack for a reason also, because I think this attack, if the boost was on a different attack, would really like this boost. Just like if you play an overpowered polar plow at range 1, even without an ice spike, it's do you have focus?
It's just
If not,
7. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just you're just expecting them to punch you as hard as they can and then die.
Yeah, it's 7 damage, can't cross out, loses to literally only dive. And even then they don't hit you back. So if I have polar plow if I have 2 copies of polar plow in my hand, overpower polar plow, that's a rough one. Is probably more the play than EX polar plow would be.
I don't know if I would say that, because it costs a force and everything, and like you probably are already getting power elsewhere, and it protects you against like a random EX sweep. But like, if it wasn't a trade-off, you would love to overpower polar plow, but it is a trade-off.
Gotcha.
There is very real reasons to choose any of overpower polar plow, EX polar plow, or just play polar plow twice.
Okay.
Right? Like when you have those reliable cards, you might just play them twice.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, why not hit for 10 damage over 2 turns instead of
but it is worth noting
9 once.
Polar plow is not a card that. So there's 2 things about polar plow. Unlike every other card we've discussed so far, polar plow does not move the opponent. If they're not in the corner or on an ice spike, that 5 is what you're getting.
Okay.
Possibly less.
Yeah, because if they move or something, if they do cross out and there's an ice spike underneath them, now there's an ice spike between them and I'm doing less.
Yeah, and it's the only card in your kit for which that is true, right? Every other card has a push or a pull or icicle drop, which just hits if they're on a spike.
Right.
Polar plow is it's got the before if they're in the corner, but like they can control that.
Yeah.
It's specifically a counter to them just like hugging the corner and trying to not be near any of your spikes because you have just fewer room to play with.
Okay.
So it's harder to get the ice spike bonus on polar plow than it is on most of the rest of his kit
because they have to be standing on it pretty much. Rose, you said that you had a couple things that you wanted to say, and I only heard one. Do you have another thing you wanted to add?
Yep. I don't know if Andarel wants to talk about this. I imagine this will come up. Grasp versus Fierce. Grasp is your normal that also pushes and pulls, so it's pretty high value. But something I do like doing is like Fierce turn 1 and say, okay, I'm going to start taxing your focus right now. You have focus, or else I'm going to polar power you next turn, for instance.
Yeah,
that's kind of threat.
Yeah, I don't usually do that because I value Grasp so highly with him, but that's a perfectly reasonable play. I mean, the game starts breaking down once you start hitting 7 power, and that's one of the quickest ways to get it.
Yep.
And also, like gluing Fierce to a reliable card is
that's just value.
Time-tested value.
Yeah, no problem.
Yep. And also the close on this card, close 3, most of the time is going to trade with a slow, but sometimes you're here, and if they want to focus it, they're not hitting you.
Yeah.
If they want to sweep it, it probably breaks the sweep. Well, depending on the board state, if you can move the single ice spike between you.
Right.
Yeah.
So be aware of opportunities to use this as I'm just going to get a 3-5 damage. I have low Tiger Shot. It's not common, but sometimes it happens.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like a 1-7 close 3, even if it didn't have bonkers potential power, is a great anti-zoner card.
Yes.
Yeah, with 6 guard.
Yeah, you can play some grappler movement and actually hit out of it, which is cool. But also, you might be hitting for a lot more upside.
Yeah, I mean, you might just hit for like 2 or 3 and close 3 and like trade. You get a gauge, and they get a gauge, and
Yeah,
whatever.
But like,
And, like,
other
honestly,
characters will do that and hit for nothing.
hit
So
or
yeah,
not
like, honestly, that's
not hit
pretty
at
good.
all, not hit at all, and
Yeah.
just trade life for positioning. This is a better version of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, this is kind of that boss card thing, right? Like, you've got cards that are like they feel like cheating,
Yep.
but like he's not a busted character, right? He's got a bunch of really really powerful cards, and the trick is kind of navigating how that all plays into his kit.
Right, yeah, because you are talking a lot of things are just expensive and difficult to manage, right? Like setting up
And
these
this is
board states is
also
tricky.
this is also by far the most reliable card in his kit, and it kind of anti-synergizes with a lot of the other board states that you're trying to do.
Sure,
Right, like if
yeah,
you're trying to
because
set up
you would
an
love
icicle
ice
zone,
spikes every other time, and this doesn't give it to you.
yeah, it sure doesn't.
Yeah, interesting.
like,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Should we move on to Shovel
Yeah.
Drop?
The card with I think the most text in his kit, possibly.
Yes, most individual effects. 7 different things if you count his character card.
This
Yep.
this seems like a contender. Sorry for new players. The inside exceed exceed community in joke. This seems like a contender for a replacement for Talon Sweep as like a super easy card to misread.
Yeah, everyone always forgets like one line of text
Oh,
on this
yeah.
card.
It
It's
doesn't
not always
matter-
the same one, but
Yeah.
What's
one of them.
funny about this card is that like Talon Sweep, everyone knows what it does, but does it wrong. This card is like you have to go through the flowchart and you just forget a step.
Yeah,
Like
I feel
no step is that confusing, but there's a lot of them.
there's a lot of them, and when you're looking at it in your hand, I feel bad for people who don't know what we're talking about here. This is an old Exceed joke from even before I was in the community. This is a hit effect, not a before effect. Everybody thinks this is a range 5 play. It's a range 1 play. People get caught out by this all the time. I have fallen victim to this. Every new Exceed player reads this wrong.
It was a before effect briefly in playtest. It was broken.
We are back talking about the actual character we're here to talk about. Sorry about the interlude, everyone. So tell me a little bit about Shovel Drop, despite the fact, or other than the fact that it has many, many effects on it.
Let's
That
go through
first
the
line.
flowchart. Yeah.
Yeah. That ignore armor on a big red character, like Akuma, is
That
pretty
feels
good.
I like that. Okay.
It is speed 1 ignore armor.
Not going to be closing out games in low life situations the way that I would with overhead on Ryu, for example.
Yeah. The opponents cannot move you is sometimes quite relevant, but often just kind of a like situational thing.
It helps versus some random like pushing fireballs type of stuff.
Yeah. This is part of like the super heavy life where you have really weird situational counter type stuff. The big thing with this card is the before effect. I think that's the most important effect.
And this is the one that I used to misread a lot.
Yeah. So he jumps into the air, right? Leaves a spike.
Leaves a spike behind
where he's
him.
standing.
Here, let me play this just so we can do this. And then he advances 2 or 3. He goes to here or here from this position.
Yes. And that means that the effective range of this card is going to be so if he's advancing 2, you have to be at least 2. If you're 3 away, then they both hit you. If you're 4 away, then 3 hits you. So this card is basically a 2 to 4.
A 2 to 4, sure. It's specifically not at range 1, despite what the range band says.
Yes, the range is not correct. It's kind of like how there's some Street Fighter cards that are like a 1 to 2 that advance 3 type situation.
Bird kick.
Yeah,
SDK.
Yep.
This is a very similar situation where it's like a dashing attack that kind of it goes active a moment later.
Right.
It hurts. It's got armor, so it's got an effective trade. If you pop a spike, it's 6 or 7 effective power. It crushes focus, no problem. If you're in Exceed mode, assuming they're on a spike.
What do you mean by that 6 or 7 effective power? So you're including the armor in there. So you're talking about the overall like delta of the attack is on its own is 4 because it's how much damage you're doing,
1 armor
minus 1 damage that your opponent would be doing. Ice Spike, now we're talking about 6. Exceed mode, we're talking about 7. Is where that number came from? I gotcha. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Gotcha.
And so, go ahead.
A couple notable things about this before. Or actually, no, you finish your thought because I think you're talking more directly about this.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's kind of a jack of all trades card. It is less reliable than Polar Plow because it's got minimum range. Even though it has lower power, it is sometimes more rewarding because of the push or pull 1 and placing an extra ice spike and ignore armor.
Right.
Also doesn't use your overpower. Like Avalanche is fine, but it's no overpower. I mean, it actually kind of is overpowered. Never mind, I take that back.
Kind of.
It
I mean,
it's
+2 power now strike. It kind of is actually. Wow.
yeah, they're very similar.
There's just
and they
gauge
do stack.
involved. Yeah. Oh god, they do
Um,
stack. You're right.
But yeah, so like Shovel Drop is this like weird slow mid speed. It like doesn't usually feel bad to play because you get the 1 armor as a bit of safety, and it's got 6 defense.
Right.
And it pushes pulls 1, so it's more likely to hit for extra. But like the best value is you throw this into like a fast projectile or a move that's like a big push effect if you're against a zoner, which is really what that opponents can't move you is for, because this card will mess up zoners pretty badly.
Okay.
Yep.
Rose, you had a couple things to say, and then I have a couple questions about
Yeah.
this.
Outside the zoner matchup, a couple of notable things about this. This is I'll say dive-like in a really loose sense. This is a speed 1 dive-like, so it beats sweep
Oh, okay.
at this range.
So
Yep.
it kind of mixes up with Polar Plow then.
Yes.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, as an opener, if the opponent has a sweep like and they're trying to cover Polar Plow, it will often outslow them,
Okay.
which is pretty big.
In the corner, this range is much more reliable. Like here we are, if the opponent stays still, okay, I advance 1 because that's as far as I can advance, I hit. If the opponent moves, okay, I advance 1, that's as far as I can advance, I hit.
Right. And
even here.
And in both cases, I noticed when we were talking about the initial use case of this attack, when I place that ice spike, the push or pull 1, no matter where I advanced to, is not enough to make me actually get my opponent onto it. In the corner, it would be. Because if I'm here,
right here,
and I say, okay, I move myself, put my ice spike down, come over here, push or pull as a hit effect, second hit effect, get rid of that, do more damage. Now I can play that game in the corner. Is that also why reach on Shovel Drop is a big deal?
Not for the ice spike part, because you still can't get them to pop the ice spike you placed with them before, even with reach.
Yeah, you can't.
But it does make the range, I think Andarel said this, 1 to 5 instead of 2 to 4.
Right.
Because now you advance 2 and you hit
1.
It's also worth mentioning that this.
Oh, I guess it could pop it, yeah. No.
Yeah,
in that situation you could,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
okay.
It's worth mentioning, and I think this is kind of obvious on its face, that a 1 to 5, 3/1 with 6, or 1 to 5, 3 power to 5 power, ignore armor attack with 6 defense is a pretty good game closer.
Yeah.
If you're at low, what was that?
Yeah, as you were saying, I think we're both getting to the exact same point. If you're at low life yourself, it doesn't do the job of like an overhead assault or whatever. But if you are ahead enough to take 1 hit, it's a great way to end the game.
It's a terrifying card.
And if you just very rapidly moved the game from mid game where everybody had 11 life to late game where suddenly your opponent has 3, I don't know how. I don't know what combination of things you hit them with, but somehow you did 8 damage, and that's pretty doable. All of a sudden,
one ice spike sweep.
Yep. Yeah, that's all it takes. All of a sudden, Shovel Drop becomes a game closer.
Yep, and because of the push or pull 1, it's a fairly flexible 5 power, and so going from like 12, get chunked for 7, you're down to 5, which is quite realistic, or even 6 if you're in Exceed mode.
Sure.
That's like, they're in the corner, you assault, and there's an ice spike behind you, right? If it's like something like this, and there's a spike here, and you're here, and like they're on a spike, for example, assault into Shovel Drop might just immediately be game, right?
Yeah.
That's what 7 plus 6 ignore armor, so you're talking 13.
Yeah.
13 damage with the second half being ignore armor and advantage in the middle.
First one's on curve, advantage in between. Yeah, that's really
and
scary.
Also the mix up there is like you have a shovel slam now, which beats the dive, and it beats the grasp too.
Yep.
Exactly, dive out of the Shovel Drop, and there's a lot of things you can do to punish a range 1 dive.
Wow. Yeah.
Also, just grasp.
Like... And as you mentioned, grasp here, but and grasp actually wouldn't work on the Shovel Drop either because the opponent can't move you. Yeah, that's a really scary end game. Okay, so this is a closer card despite being a range 1 card in some positions. It's just a little bit more finicky than overhead
Yep.
into grasp or whatever.
Yeah, it's got a lot of flexibility. It does a lot of things. You need to be careful because you don't always want all of those. It does like 6 things, right? But like most of those things are not going to be actively helpful to you. Like you might get 4 or 5 of them.
Right.
And the actual printed stat line is not anything special.
Right.
So it's fine. But
Right.
it's really if you set up a situation where you can really take advantage of this card, you're doing pretty well.
Okay.
This card hurts.
And reach is kind of there to make the situational stuff a little bit easier to do.
Yeah, and overpower onto this. Like this is probably the most likely unreliable card you would throw overpower onto.
The mix-up threat.
Because if they block or if they're on a spike, then now you're crushing focus for 7 or 8,
and then they die.
Armor.
Yeah, sure. Both of you guys have mentioned Avalanche a couple of times now.
Yeah, I'm going to get on my soapbox. This boost is interesting to me because I used to think this boost was terrible, and I've come around to it pretty heavily since then.
Okay.
They made a whole season around it.
Yeah, they did. This is a cancelable boost.
The proto cancel.
Yeah.
Yep. So this boost, when you look at it on front side, this is more expensive overpower, but it's worse than that as well because overpower combines with an ice spike, and this doesn't. So this is overpower. You both of them you pay a force. This one you need to pay a gauge. You do get to then overpower as well if you really want to, but that's a very expensive line of play.
Yeah.
But as we keep talking, you keep referring back to this Akuma lesson and the difference between 2 and 3 power. 3 power now strike sounds pretty good, and when you're exceeded, this boost can say 3 power now strike.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice thing to have a boost that says, even if it costs an appropriate amount for that.
I would pay 2 force and a gauge sometimes for 3 power now strike.
Yep. And resources don't matter if they're dead.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. Now that's a well said. Okay.
So I will say I would probably almost never boost this on front side. Like you just have better ways to get the power.
Yeah.
I could see maybe if it was going to end the game or some weird situation. And I would probably never boost this and not cancel it, just because you've spent 2 force to move an ice spike 3 spaces, they then move action 1.
Yeah, I agree with both of those.
But once you're exceeded, and if you have the resources to spend the full value of this boost is pretty scary, actually.
Right. And if you were to cancel it, would you probably just be spending that cancel into a strike, or would you sometimes boost something else? Although,
I think in practice, I've basically always just struck, but I could see a world where I have enough resources that reach overpower is tempting.
If you know what's left in your opponent's deck, so that if you're basically striking for free, right? Like if you know that they can't deal with what you have,
right?
Or if they're down to wild swings, which is a thing that can happen, and you think that just cash out, because Avalanche into overpower into shovel charge, for example, at range 3, if they don't specifically have a focus to answer that, I mean they're taking 5 taking 8 getting stunned, and you draw some cards to refill what you just spent.
I guess I should you aren't ever going to cancel this into a circumstance that doesn't resolve into a strike.
Yeah.
Whether that's overpower, you're never going to prep. You don't have, and as Andarel was saying earlier, you don't have a lot of things that say boost go. If you're going to be playing this card, it's going to turn into a strike at some point on your turn.
Yes. You're not playing this to just position an ice spike. That's way too expensive.
And threaten it. Okay.
Yeah.
I get
just
you.
don't.
Okay.
It's not worth it.
That's what Shattering Stomp is for.
Yeah, it's really good at it.
Yeah, and it's way cheaper.
It's
way cheaper.
It costs less, and it gives you twice as many ice spikes.
Very true.
I arguably gives you infinitely as many ice spikes, because this is move 1.
This is move 1. It doesn't put any on the field. That's true. Okay.
Yeah. This is just it's overpower with extra steps.
Right.
Yep. It is also it's a little. Your specials tend to have ways to move your ice spikes already, so this is also nice for normals, like a sweep or something.
Yep.
Where you aren't going to get the ice spike bonus if you don't use this.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, and I mean unreactable setup into an ice spike, especially for all those normals that we say don't push or pull. Yeah, that tracks. What about our ultras? We've talked a little bit about economy so far. We've talked about how important your exceed mode is, and I assume that your exceed mode is a high priority for you. But how important are these ultras to my game plan?
I'd say it depends game to game quite a bit.
Yeah, more and less than it looks.
Okay.
They're both very good. They are both absolutely worth playing if the situation comes up, and they are both absolutely not worth playing if it doesn't. Is kind of how it comes down to me. Like, Icicle Drop is one of my favorite ultras in the game. It does 10 damage because it's always going to be able to remove an ice spike.
Yep.
It has 2 armor, so you're talking 3 gauge for 10 or 11 plus 2, which is, I would say, above going rate.
That is yes.
It's got a lot of flexible positioning, and it will beat, because of the sun immunity, a lot of things that are normally really, really hard to beat.
Yep.
It's also got after advance up to 3, which is a very, very rare example of flexible movement on a strike.
Yeah, and by flexible positioning, you mean both the movement and this has the same thing going on as Polar Plow, where you can just place an ice spike anywhere once you play this card.
Oh yeah, because it hits everywhere on the board except underneath your opponent.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I should. It hits everywhere on the board. Therefore, you can put an ice spike underneath your opponent. Everywhere except underneath your opponent. It does not hit everywhere except underneath your opponent. That would be silly. So, and this loses to movement, right? So, am I basically using this as a call out card, or am I using it as a checkmate card?
That's a really hard question to answer because it depends a lot on what you're worried about. Like, if I'm worried about, let's say, for example, I'm up against who's a good example? My gut discussion goes to like Ulrich with a card like Second Strike, right, where it's like above curve, super hard to interact with, because so Second Strike for those who don't know Season 1 cards is like 3, 4, 8 ignore armor, hit gain advantage. Like, it's super fast, it ignores armor, you just do it.
Right.
Similarly, like some characters have fast ignore guard, or just fast chunk you. You're probably not out trading Icicle Drop. I played a game of ages ago against Taxi where I was fighting, promo Shovel Knight, and they boosted the +3 speed, +3 power, +3 armor boost.
His Tropple Chalice boost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, so they played that, which is again a huge investment, right? Or a pretty big investment. It's 2 turns of boosting, and they struck with something, I forgot what. I think it might have been like Assault or Warhorn. And I was like, I just throw Icicle Drop into this because you get this by boosting a bunch. I get this by playing Icicle Drop.
Right.
That's kind of how it works.
Right. Okay.
And you hit for 9 effective, and I hit for 11 effective, and we all go home happy.
Yeah. You went home slightly happier.
But I spent a bunch of gauge, and I didn't like. That's kind of the way the resources go. And and very importantly, I spent a rebuild.
Okay. Okay.
That's crucial.
So tell me about some board states where you would go for this, because I'm scared of dive. I'm scared of cross. But there are times like I could set up. Where'd Ryu go? He's gone forever.
Oh, no, he's probably under something.
Oh yeah, he's the ice spike. He's been buried. We're finished talking about Avalanche. That's what happened.
So here's a fun one. This is a pretty good Icicle Drop situation.
Okay, they can't cross out. If they stay in the corner, they get hit. They can't assault in. They can't dive in.
They can't Tatsu in, right?
They can't Tatsu in. Hits you too. Okay.
I think Ryu's only answer to this is Metsuhado.
Metsuhado can move in exactly 1, right? Okay.
Move exactly 1, which is a pretty good answer.
Right.
I'm pretty sure you actually. I forgot.
Oh, you're right.
So maybe versus Ryu, you
right.
need the full carpet.
Talking about normals only, this is fine. If dive is down, because they're probably not going to be teching my stuff at all. Makes me strike.
If dive is down, then this is fine.
This is fine.
If dive is down, this is fine.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay. Similar
interestingly,
that I would use Polar Plow in the corner or something.
I mean, interestingly, if you're in this situation, right? Like, this is prime shovel. Even this is prime Icicle Drop versus Shovel Slam time, right?
Right. Oh, sure.
The only thing that beats it is dive, and Shovel Slam destroys dive.
Right. Okay.
And also so does Grasp.
Okay.
And Assault don't help either.
And then if my opponent isn't in the corner, Now I have to contend with Cross as well. So this ice spike
Oh.
being behind it.
Here, you were asking about situations you might not remove an ice spike. You call out their dive of assault right here, and then you play Icicle Drop the next turn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the time where you might not remove it.
Gotcha.
But like you're specifically going for that because like
Yeah.
normally,
Yeah.
normally you just want to get the free damage, but Icicle Drop is like one of the main reasons to leave ice spikes around because
Okay.
it's very, very high value if it hits.
Yeah. And it is possible to set up a hit. It's not unplayable, but it does require some thought about what your opponent could play because they're going to be looking for it.
Yep, but don't forget.
Yep.
As soon as you
it
can
is
exceed
very
in-
possible for it to have board states where this card will always hit.
Okay.
If
Yeah.
they strike.
Okay.
And if you have 6 gauge, which definitely can happen because you've got a couple of fasts that can just throw down, and you've got rebuild. You can have 6 gauge and have one ice spike, and then set up a situation where they have to diffuse an icicle drop checkmate like
Right.
immediately.
Right. And your gauge situation is not so tenuous that exceeding and playing icicle drop is an either or. It might be kind of close.
It's
but...
not an either or, it is kind of close. You were asking about like how do you value these versus exceeding.
Right.
The main time that I won't exceed is because I think it's getting in my way of landing a successful icicle drop.
Okay.
I think Snow Slash is cheap enough you can normally both Snow Slash and exceed.
Okay.
Yeah.
But icicle drop versus exceeding does.
And you might be able to afford both, but if you could afford both, the icicle drop is probably your kill shot.
Probably. Well,
I don't even
guess
know.
you could icicle drop and then exceed. That would work too if it worked.
Yeah, but that's kind of risky because that's relying on hitting the icicle drop like for sure.
Yeah.
That one gauge could be a big difference. And so your excess gauge is basically a couple things. You can use it to spend the force for Shovel Slam if you want to preserve cards in hand.
Right.
You can use it for Avalanche, the kill shot. You can use it for your ultras, which are both very good.
Yep.
Or you can use it to change cards or move because again, your economy is kind of tenuous.
Yeah, you need
those
that.
are all like very real concerns. Or you can use it to pay the force cost on one of these if you need to preserve hand size because you're already at like 2 or 3 cards in hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, the theme of difficult economic decisions in order to balance out how overpowering some of your attacks can be, that theme continues.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And speaking of difficult economic decisions, let's rewind to season 2 for a second and talk about everybody's favorite card archetype, the Roar. So a bunch of season 2 characters, and you'll see this in season 3 also, and in season 4 to some extent.
Right?
Yeah. It's not as common. Like Shovel and Shield has it with Shovel of Hope, I think it is.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
And Rebuild has it, but the Roar is basically the idea that you can take a character with really, really good ways to spend cards and give them like one good econ button. For Bison, this is Bison Dollars.
This is the Equus Ultra Boost too.
Yeah, Dragon's Roar is one of them. Slinka's got Fortune's Roar.
Oh, okay. That's why it's called. Okay, I gotcha.
And those both Fortunes and Dragons draw 5 cards, right? 4+1 or 5+0.
Right.
And they like totally reset you, but you're giving up a pretty scary card in the process.
Yeah.
We've just talked at length about how good Icicle Drop is. Let's talk about how good Rebuild is, because this is one of the best boosts, possibly in the game.
Okay.
Yes, you keep talking about how tight your economy is, and I'm like, I see exactly where you're coming from. Because if you don't have Rebuild, your economy is miserable.
Yeah, and that's why Shovel Charge is important for me, because this is the only card that reduces your reliance on Rebuild.
And that'll let you play more Icicle Drops.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So Rebuild is a weird card. Let's just walk through the steps on it because everyone plays this wrong. And honestly, I wrote this card and I still play it wrong. So when you play Rebuild, you do exactly what it says. You draw 2 cards, then you remove any number of ice spikes to draw that many additional cards, then add this card to gauge. And you only get that if you remove 1 or more ice spikes.
Okay,
there's
so
a comma.
It's not draw 2 cards, I remove 0 and I add this card to my gauge. I only get that if I remove 1 or more.
Correct. Yeah.
So I could draw 2 cards. But if I did that, I should just CC this. And why would I do that?
Yeah.
And
don't CC this.
Yeah. I could draw 2 cards, remove 1 ice spike, draw 1 more card, add this card to my gauge, draw for end of turn.
Yeah, this card strongly incentivizes you to remove at least 1 ice spike with it.
Okay.
Right? You're rebuilding. You're not just like, I don't know,
right.
wiggling your shovel around.
Right, sure. I'm not dusting my shovel off. Or I could do 2, and that's 2 cards and then 1 for end of turn and a gauge.
Yep, and removing 2 ice spikes that were in awkward positions to get 4 cards total and a gauge plus end of turn draw is the Roar.
Right.
Shovel and Shield, I believe, gets that, right? It's 1 force, and then they draw
Yeah.
4, and then they add it to gauge. So it's kind
Right.
of the same going rate. You just pay the cost in Ice Spikes instead of in Force.
And sometimes ice spikes won't be relevant because the fight was over here, and then I did dashing through to chase my opponent down, and now we're not even ever going to be on the side of the board again.
Yep. A very reasonable situation is something like this, with this one underneath you,
Right.
and say there's one underneath the opponent. Like, I would probably feel reasonable removing the one underneath me, and like maybe the one that's 1 behind, the one that's 2 behind, if I wanted an extra card, but it would be kind of a choice.
Right.
Yep.
I wouldn't remove the one underneath them. I don't know why they're now. The Ryu has suddenly turned into Icicle Drop. But like, in this situation, right, when you've got an Ice Spike, can you
Let's see what I can do. Oh God, we're doing our best here, people. Tabletop Simulator is holding on for dear life.
But in a situation like this, like I'd probably feel comfortable moving the one underneath me because again,
Sure.
I don't move that much.
Sure.
And if I do move that much, it's going to be with Shovel Drop, which replaces this anyways.
Right.
And then one more because the extra cards is really important, and
Right.
and then it's just a choice of which one I feel most willing to get rid of.
Right. So and
So-
it's at that point it's a big hand reload, but it's also a key charge.
It's also a key charge. And one thing that's important is it's a big hand reload. It's not a small hand reload.
Right.
And the reason that that's important is because a lot of characters have like a flow of 1 card here and 2 cards there, and that's kind of how they stay topped up, like the Giovanna thing,
Sure.
where you strike, you get cards, strike, you get cards. If Polar Knight is going to do this, he wants to be at like maybe 2 or 3 cards in hand, so he doesn't overflow and have to discard.
Right.
Getting this swept out of your hand when you were planning to do it next turn is like the most miserable feeling.
Or
It's
parried.
so bad. Yeah, parry, like, at least they spend to parry. Like, you feel like, oh, they were being smart about this. If this thing
Right.
gets swept
Oh,
and it's
at
random, you
random?
cry.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty
it's just
rude.
that insult to injury.
Right. Okay. So and this would be a great way to build gauge in order to do the other icicle drop or in order to exceed.
Yep.
But
Yep.
so, and I'm assuming that this is a mid or late game play because I need icicle spikes on the board, but I also need to have spent a lot of cards to make this valuable.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so you're often going to be holding this card in your hand for a while.
Okay. Oh, and having this in my hand allows me to play more aggressively then.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm willing to spend for that overpower or that reach because I know that more cards and more force are coming later.
Yeah. And then you get
Gotcha.
swept and you cry.
And then,
Yes.
hence why that's so dangerous. Okay.
Yeah, or they parry it because, you just went down to like 1 card in hand. They're like, I wonder what that card could be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's
probably-
very telegraphed.
Yeah, but it's strong, so do it when you can. Except
I mean,
icicle
based
drop is
on-
strong.
Based on raw numbers, there are very few card reloads that are similarly, just like sheer draw potential than
Right.
rebuild. Rebuild is absurd.
Yeah,
but
depends on how many force you value an ice spike as, but ice spikes can be made less relevant over the course of a game.
Yep.
Okay.
yeah, it's a weird card. Using this card is like really key, I think, to playing a good Polar Knight. It's possibly your most important card because it's your best damage. It's fast enough that like this might actually outspeed their slows.
Oh,
If
sure.
you strike with Icicle Drop, like it'll
Yeah.
outspeed Sweep or Die, Super Focus.
Trading
and,
up.
I think I've done like a light icicle drop checkmate before once too, just
Yeah.
because.
Like it's most like cards like this are 0 speed. I want to say like that just kind of feels normal. Like you have like Angler Call, I guess, but that's only 6. That's not
Right.
11.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Angler Call is 6. Might be a little higher, but yeah, like this card, it hurts.
Yeah. But not having reload hurt or rebuild hurts you.
The
Yeah.
nice thing is you don't need to EX this basically ever. So you can definitely do the first rebuild and play a second icicle drop. And if you rebuild and you're releasing it into the deck and you haven't seen second icicle drop, you'll probably see it off the rebuild.
Yep, and you also
Sure.
like in that case have time to build up some more spikes. The main thing is that it's very hard to rebuild and then icicle drop. You can icicle drop and then rebuild, and that's often reasonable, but you can't rebuild and then icicle drop.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Notable things. This
Yeah.
is a key charge as well. We said that. I think that's worth pointing out that it sucks having this card stuck in your gauge when you reshuffle because
Oh,
that
yeah.
could be a rebuild or an icicle drop that you did something with on the second run through your deck.
Yep.
So if you can spend it out of gauge, like hopefully by exceeding or playing an altar or something, but even as force
Yeah.
before you
So
reshuffle, that's good.
one other thing that I want to mention a little bit is that and you kind of talked about this, you'd like sort of hinted at it. the ways in which the opponent interacts with you, right, in Exceed. There's if the opponent is trying to dodge a strike, there are a couple of ways they normally do it, right? They will push you, like move themselves, play as dodge, play armor. Those are kind of the most common ones.
Okay.
When it comes, if you can correct me, Rose, if you can think of any other, like, there's like ignore armor or guard also, or there's like the last one.
Yeah.
Like those are the 5 main interaction points. They can move you, they can move themselves, they can auto dodge in some way, they can ignore armor or guard, or they can. What was the last one? Oh, they can play armor. Those Polar Knight is a character that has kind of interesting ways of dealing with all of those, right? Like auto dodges in Exceed tend to be either positioning or speed based, with speed mostly being in season 6.
Yep.
Speed based dodges are obviously pretty bad against him because he's slow as heck.
Yeah.
So speed based dodges don't work against Icicle Drop. Moving the opponent, which is a very common way of dodging things, right? Grasp likes and push threes and things.
Doesn't work on Icicle Drop.
Those just don't work on Icicle Drop.
Yep.
Right? Because it doesn't care where you are. It only cares where they are.
Right.
So you mentioned earlier, like, you have to respect if the opponent has a whirl about your checkmates. Whirls don't work on Icicle Drop.
Right.
Yep.
They also don't work on Shovel Drop.
Neither does ignore armor guard because it's stun immune.
Which whirls are usually very safe, reliable plays. Like, a range 3 whirl is going to beat sweep and beat focus. Like, most characters just don't really have a lot of ways to deal with that. Polar Knight doesn't really care, right? He's got Polar Plow. That still hits. He's got Shovel Drop that's not movable. He's got Icicle Drop that doesn't care. If you were on the spike, you're still on the spike. So he's very good at, like, just straight up crushing a lot of these, like, weird specific defensive options that characters care about.
Right.
If you're relying on a DP to save you from a setup, and he's a good setup character, Stomp. It beats your DP. Icicle Drop. Your DP might advance you 1, but that's pretty trivially beaten by a second Icicle or second Ice Spike.
Polar
Plow, right?
Yep.
It's got defense and it counter hits.
Yep.
Shovel Slam's got 3 guard.
Yep.
That's a lot.
Even a range dodge, like, if I'm specifically jockeying for position.
5 types of ways to dodge. You were saying, I think Icicle Drop invalidates like 3 of them on its own. You can't really tend to dodge it by moving you, like you're saying. You can't stun it out. What was the third one I was saying? You have to move yourself or range dodge.
Yeah, I cannot hear you, Gear. You might be muted.
Yeah, you do appear to be.
This has happened before. Sit tight, people.
Yeah, so that's like the thing with Polar Knight, right? Like, that's one of the reasons Icicle Drop is so good, is that.
Hello.
Oh, now hello. You're back.
Sorry about that. I added nothing to that conversation. Please continue. You guys are doing great.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm saying. Like the 5, like, defensive interactions that we were saying, right? Like move yourself, move the opponent, auto stun, dodge, or armor.
Right.
And Icicle Drop beats 3 of them. It beats auto stunning. It beats most, if not every, speed dodge. It can lose to range dodges, but those are quite rare.
And it's pretty easy to set up around them, right? Like, I'm not looking for a specific spot to hit Icicle Drop, because I could hit Icicle Drop back here if it's a range 2 dodge, or here if it's a range 3
exactly.
dodge.
Yeah. And obviously pushing Polar Knight doesn't affect Icicle Drop.
And ignore armor, ignore guard doesn't do anything to it. I guess
ignore armor it helps a little bit, but if you trade ignore armor,
right?
Yeah, if I trade like a 3-power IA into Icicle Drop, then, like, ow.
Yeah.
And even having armor yourself, like, it does work. This doesn't say ignore armor on it, but if you block an Icicle Drop, I'm not miserable about the way I am some Ultras.
Yeah,
I'm not happy either, but you're still blocking like 10 power at least.
Right. Yeah, and it's the 3 gauge 10 power. It's not like I'm burning my entire life's blood on this 10 power, right?
Right.
Blocking Icicle Drop, I mean, it's fine. If your economy is bad and that block is expensive for you, a Polar Knight might even come out ahead.
Yeah. And the only thing that I mentioned when you guys couldn't hear me is that this is not, and you guys were talking about this too, this is not just relevant to Icicle Drop. A lot of his kit, Andarel, you were saying, for Polar Plow and Shovel Slam, your DP doesn't work. All of these other things don't work. You have many ways, not just on Icicle Drop, to kind of muscle through defensive options.
Yes, and he's a real mix-up character, right? Like, he's got true truly enforceable mix-up. And
Yeah.
one thing is that if you look at a mix-up character like, Milia, for example, where you've got, hey, I've got some ignore guard, that's pretty good. I've got a above curve options. A lot of those are kind of like range sensitive. Polar Knight, that's still true, right? He's still pretty range sensitive, but the range is a weird factor of where you are, where the ice spikes are, what cards he's
Right.
got up. It's a lot more kind of complex than other mix-up characters. But because of that, like when things are going well, he can cover a lot more than usual.
Right. Milia does not have a 1-8 or a 1-7 as a mix-up card in particular, especially.
She's got a 1-5 as a mix-up character, so that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Iron Savior,
Right.
her car is pretty big, but it loses to sweep, unlike these.
Right.
And also, she doesn't have red numbers. She would kill for red numbers.
Yeah, his Polar Knight's mix-ups are for, again, 11 sometimes.
And that's a nice quality to have as a mix-up character, because like even if you're a little behind, you are very much in the game.
You don't have to win that many.
Yeah, I mean the characters that you're looking at for that are like Soul, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Like not as many characters can generate the sheer amount of raw power that Polar Knight can.
Right.
And his setup requirements and his like backfire requirements are a lot lower than Akuma's. When Akuma goes wrong, Akuma goes completely off the rails. Polar, that's not really the case.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Though it can be. It's mostly economic. If you're like stuck with few ice spikes and like no cards in hand, you're in a pretty bad spot.
Yeah, you can't rebuild at that point. That makes sense. I gotcha. Should we move on to Snow Slash?
Yeah. It's a weird card.
It's a block that hits you.
Yeah. What if block also hit?
Yeah, block plus focus. It's blockus. This card is, you're not usually thrilled to play it, but you're often rarely sad to play it. I mean, 2 gauge is very affordable cost for a card that starts off at 6 effective and has very low downside.
Yep, and can very easily push onto another ice spike to either they're on an ice spike or you push them onto an ice spike to increase that.
Yeah, it's also worth mentioning that something you've talked about a little bit with when it came to Shovel Drop, and it's also true with Icicle Drop. Characters like this, right, super heavies, their biggest weakness tends to be like that playing at low life and just dying. Like sometimes you're just dead.
Yeah.
If your opponent is throwing an assault at you nothing that you have outspeeds assault. Like you have no.
And if you have not very much life, you don't care how much stun immunity you have.
Yeah.
You'll die.
Yeah, the opponent plays overpower assault, or I don't know, soul or something, and they play +2 or +3 power assault. Like you've got 4 life, like you're just dead. If Stomp doesn't hit, you're just dead. And so Snow Slash is the out to that situation. In that case, they just spent a bunch of resources. You might have dealt them 6 or 7. Like, yeah, you spent some cards, but you took 0 and hit them for 4 to 7.
Okay.
That's a pretty big upside. So it's this card is kind of obvious on its face in a lot of ways.
It's block that hits.
Yeah, it does what it does. It's got less guard than focus, so it is more vulnerable to ignore armor. Which is kind of unusual.
It does actually lose to grasp, unlike focus.
It does lose to grasp, or at least it doesn't hit back to grasp. So you spent a bunch of resources, but you didn't die, and that's important.
Yep.
It's a weird card because you don't usually you're not usually thrilled to play this card. Like if I play this card into like Hell Salvation or a super ultra that normally if I were gonna block it I would cry and just spend a bunch of resources, then sure I got a bunch of damage in the process. That's better than block. But I'm still spending all those resources plus the 2 gauge to boot.
Plus the 2 gauge, right?
Yeah.
So outside of like an I'm about to die end game scenario, do I just have better things to do with my gauge than play Snow Slash?
The big thing is that 1 gauge, right? Because you spent 2, you get 1 back for hitting it. If you're going to hit, is not that big of an opportunity cost. Your gauge is not that tight that 1 is going to kill you. And when it works really well. The more dangerous thing about Snow Slash is that if I'm playing Snow Slash, I need to be willing to spend to reduce the damage because it's only got 5 base, and that's fine. And I'm not willing to spend Icicle Drop typically. which
Right.
means I'm usually spending the 1 for 2, the block rate, not spending ultras, because I can spend the other Snow Slash, and like block and is a little situational. We'll get to that later.
Okay.
But like this is just throwing cards at winning a strike, or at least not losing a strike. And yeah, you usually have better things to do, but that's pretty good.
You win the game by winning strikes.
Yeah.
And you also don't lose the game by not losing strikes, right? Like this card tends to be good at it's expensive, so you might lose economically, but you're not really going to lose on damage.
Yep.
Okay, but if you have an economic advantage enough to play the card in the first place, you can probably convert it in other ways, and you'd like to convert it in other ways. This is why you're not thrilled to play it, but you will if you have to live.
Yeah, or if
Even just if it's value in the situation, like it is always nice to have as an option, even if like it's not the most economically priced option in your kit.
Okay.
One type of card that has been getting more popular recently, I think, is the if you move past the opponent, ignore guard shape.
Yep, sure.
Milia's got it. I think there's at least one in season 6, or just ignore guard shapes in general. And you're pretty vulnerable to ignore guard because you're a slow guardy character, and this is a lot easier to set up than icicle drop.
Yep.
And it sure will beat ignore guard.
Right. Okay.
So it's a very real way of forcing the opponent to play around a pretty low cost card in the grand scheme of things. The opponent throwing a card into block, they usually don't feel too bad about it. They didn't take damage. You made you spend a bunch. You're fine. The opponent throwing a card into slow slash, like that can hurt. That's a bigger ask. It's basically never going to outspeed and stun. It's 0 speed. But again, 0 speed can be good if the opponent is relying on outslowing you, which can happen.
Yeah, that can happen. Sure. Okay. And then how about block and ...
This boost is so funny to me because it's the card and the boost do very similar things. The boost is gauge instead of force, though, which in my opinion matters a lot. If I'm going to commit gauge to blocking anyway, I feel like a lot of the time I'll play the Ultra. Why not?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I don't boost this very often. Like I feel like you can boost it to try and set up some shenanigans, but you don't really have enough economy to support too many shenanigans. Just play Snow Slash.
When this is good, I think, is when you want the option to block a lot, but also like maybe it's just having 2 armor will hit a breakpoint. That really matters.
This is also like if the opponent is setting up a setup, like if they play Way of the Warrior, block and can be pretty scary into that. Because it lets you preserve the mix-up and also basically wipe the lost case.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
It's still not like great because you could just get spiked. But like then they actually have to respect, especially if you're like at range 2 or range 3 where you can cross out.
Or stomp.
Yeah, like the downside, or stomp if you're at range 2. Like the downside is there, but like if you play block and they assault with Way of the Warrior and you played stomp and they hit you, like you're spending 2 gauge to wipe 4 power. That's not great, but it's not nothing.
And Way of the Warrior could have been much worse. And if they were trying to cash out on a bigger Way of the Warrior payout, you might have dissuaded them from doing that by playing this boost.
Yeah, again, like it's not great, and just like playing Snow Slash is often going to be more effective.
And
right,
and because it's face down and not face up is really what it comes down to.
Sure.
But I think you might play block and this is I think the only card in Polaris kit that is really skewed towards boost or strike, which
in
is
one way or another.
Yeah, and I would say it's skewed towards strike pretty heavily.
Do you ever find yourself spending it as force?
Yep, I was just about to say that. This is a very good card to spend if you need 2 force. Compared to the rest of your kit.
Makes sense.
It's your most specific card. It's got the lowest reward of pretty much anything. It's sometimes you just got to move, or spend it on a block or a Snow Slash. Like it's a good card. Don't get me wrong. If Snow Slash is the level of Ultra that you have to spend as force, that means that your hand is full of good cards.
You've got a pretty good hand. Sure, that makes sense.
But Polar has a lot of good cards. The hard part is leveraging them.
Right. Okay. So that is the kit. As we approach the 2-hour mark, there's a reason we call the show Excess Exceed. any interactions? We've talked quite a bit about normals here and there, but any specific interactions among the normals that we should know about? Any particular use for the boosts? How do we evaluate these?
Hmm.
I can think of a
Runs.
couple.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead, Rose.
Yeah. We've talked about this one in particular. Grasp, this is the normal that actually works really well with your ability.
Right.
You get to pull people into ice spikes. Sweep, this is the highest damage normal, and this breaks focus on its own with an ice spike, like before you exceed it.
Yeah, it also offensively breaks defensive sweep, which is kind of unusual, and it's
Oh yeah.
really important interaction.
Normally, you need like an EX for that.
Yeah, you just do it.
Assault, once you've exceeded, sweep no longer is safe against this. That's a really good breakpoint. I think you've mentioned that one, Gear.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cross, you are a pretty close range character. You're not like hard committed to it the way some characters are because you have like Polar Plow and the like, but you're willing to cross out, and when you cross out, even if you don't hit, you're getting ice spike value.
Yeah. Also, crossing out and hitting for 6 in the process is
That's very funny. Yep.
Pretty.
That feels pretty cool.
It's peak comedy for some characters, because some characters just like accept that you can cross out against them, right? Like that's not a rare situation.
Yeah.
And if they're eating 6 instead of 3, or even 5 instead of 3, those numbers start looking a lot worse.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the ones I could think of.
Okay.
So dive if they're on an ice spike is actually terrifying because it's hitting for 7 or 8.
Right. Yes, that's the other thing, that the really early game thing you can do is like if Shattering Stomp them onto an ice spike and dive breaks through sweep.
And say, hey, hope you can handle this 7 power dive.
Yeah, some characters like want to eat dive. If I play dive, right? I'm normal side Polar Knight, range 1, and there's some situations you can think of where like you might just accept the dive to move in to let the opponent move in, right?
Right.
If you're like a close range character. If I'm Polar and you try and focus, if you try and sweep my dive, you're dead. If you try and focus my dive, then now you are the ice spike pops. I put a spike behind me. So let's just demonstrate the situation on the board. So I'm not theater of the minding this.
Yeah, let me hop out here. So
this is a reasonable situation.
Oh, sorry.
So Shattering Stomp happened, right? You're standing on top of an ice spike.
Right.
So if I play dive here, most characters, right? You move in, you trade down with sweep. You're not thrilled about it, but you're at least in. And if they're a range 1 character, then that's scary. Polar Knight, you're talking just straight up crushing sweep, even without exceeding, because it hits for 7. Right?
Right.
You put the ice spike here. So that's rough.
And then you grasp them.
Well, yeah, and so that's the focus versus grasp mix up. But here, if you don't mind diagonaling this ice spike.
Okay.
If you want to not get crushed, you play focus.
Right.
Okay, so we just traded 5 for 4. So you still traded down somehow.
On a focus. Doesn't happen
on
often.
A focus. You get a card, I get an ice spike. Now we're in this position.
And you don't have a focus anymore.
You're down a focus.
Yeah.
And there's an ice spike behind me that I can grasp you onto.
Right, okay.
It's not a good spot to be in.
So making them spend their focuses as Polar Knight is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is the most important card to get rid of. It does often mean that there is a non-zero chance that you are going to be saying the phrase read focus strike a lot.
Ah, okay.
That's a pretty popular Polar Knight phrase, because he's the character you want to hold focus against, and
they will have it more often than
it
not.
also means you might be less likely to be read because they rely on playing focus to not take the extra damage, which means they're less likely to play reading on you, which is pretty nice. So that's the interaction with dive. Block, it's free gauge. You can parry focus, you can parry other things that can't be moved. You can parry their 5 speeds because a lot of the time 5 speeders are what beats Shovel Slash.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like those kind of mid-speed shapes. You can out mid-speed them if you can get rid of those. Because this card beats fasts and slows, but loses to mid-speeds.
But loses to other mid-speeds. Sure.
So to some other mid-speeds. It's a card.
Right.
It's definitely one of the cards of all time.
One of the cards of all time, yeah. What am I using my light on?
Well, Shovel Slam.
Sure. Okay.
Shovel Charge is a fine light delivery method. Shovel Drop's a fine light delivery method. Spike is a good one.
Sure.
And like Shovel Drops is again like it's not great with light, but it opens up a bunch of good mix-up options. The thing about light is that if the opponent is scared to play slow, which they're already like pretty good at, light obviously means they have to gamble, but they still outspeed you a lot of the time.
Right.
So light's kind of awkward with him. Shovel Charge is your only real like fast option. I
It
think
makes it
Rose
really genuinely above curve. Yeah, no, Rose picked out the awesome play of doing Icicle Drop with light.
yeah.
But yeah, I like what you're saying about sweep. Sweep is good. You don't really need to play light as often.
Okay,
When your sweep is crushing their
and
sweeps and focuses.
maybe similarly with Grasp, like Fierce is cool, and if you can get a payout even higher, then maybe go for it. But you get a lot out of Grasp.
Yeah, and that's part of why we mentioned that this is a character who's really bad at boost go. The fact that
Right.
even your normal boosts are not great boosts means
Right.
you don't you're not good at boost go. You're good at like boost punch.
Right, which sometimes is what you want, but not always if you're not in a good situation for it.
Yeah, defend is fine. Spike is
Cards
obviously good.
either. Yeah, most of your cards don't already have enough guard or won't have enough guard even with defend.
Even with
Yeah.
defend.
They
But
just
but similarly, like you already have good mid speeds and you can already crush stuff. So Spike
Right.
is not as important.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense.
Spike might just be your movement fodder, which is fine, honestly.
Yeah, you need that.
Yeah, or it's your block bait.
Right.
I will
Okay.
say, compared to like really hyper aggressive characters, you can afford to be a little slower just because you need to take some time getting your bicycle set up. And once you are set up, you can get back into the game very fast. In terms
Yeah,
of damage. Yeah.
a lot of hyper aggressive characters kind of live or die by those like chaining those moment to moment hits. Polar just does enough damage. That's not as big of a deal.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
subsidizes the turns into like he's like I hit you for one, and that's how many strikes another person would have, how much damage another person would have done in 3 strikes.
Yeah,
Yep.
like when he wins, when he trades, right? He's usually trading up by like 1 to 3 a lot of the time, though sometimes more if Icicle Drop or Shovel Slam is involved.
Right.
When he wins, he wins.
Right. Hard. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So those are the normals then.
Yep. And he's a pretty good user of basically all of them, but again, it relies on icicle spikes and it involves some funky math.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
And a big part of this that we're talking about, like we're talking about all these win conditions as though the ice spikes are free. They're not. You have to play for them. You have to get them into place. You need to position them yourself or use your boost, which costs you the attack. Like there's a lot of decisions that we're making here.
And none of them, except for Grasp, let you move the opponent. So
right.
The normals have good stat lines, right? They're kind of the gold standard for shapes as far as defaults go, but not having that extra push or pull, that's real.
Yeah, makes it tough to actually use your character ability with him. Okay. So that's every card he's got. Every single word of every line of text on Polar Knight. Anything else that we want to cover kind of game plan wise here?
I feel like we kind of hit the overall things. We kind of mentioned, actually, so a thing with Polar that's a little bit unusual. He's a heavy. So Rose, what are your thoughts on just EXs in general with him? Because he definitely has weird interactions with EXs.
I did call out specifically Shovel Slam. Shovel Slam is one I'm super interested in, but then like EX Assault means on front side your assault is breaking sweep, for instance, which is cool. Other than that, I can't think of any that are super notable instantly.
And so that's kind of Shovel Charge is potentially a good EX, but giving up both Shattering Stomps is rough. So the interesting thing is that EXs, right? So if you look at the normals, EX Assault's obviously great, EX Dive's obviously great, EX Block is EX Block, it's a meme. Same with EX Focus. EX Spike is actually pretty good with him because he doesn't really care that much about holding Spike or defend. EX Cross is less important because of Stomp. Like
it's also a little sad because you probably want to run after you cross.
Yeah. EX Grasp is potentially really good, but you have so many answers to Grasp anyways. Like he doesn't really love EXing that much unless you're in a situationally huge position. And obviously giving up 2 cards with an economy like his is pretty substantial.
Yeah, that requires some thought anyway.
And I think one of the most notable normal EX is the EX Sweep, and like you don't need that. You can just break the sweep anyway.
You can just do it with an Ice Spike instead.
Yeah, like EX Sweep is kind of outclassed by Shovel Slam a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so that puts him in an interesting position because he's got amazing card quality, but he actually anti-synergizes with a lot of the things that characters normally get card quality from, right? Like their neutral boosts and the normal boosts. He's forced, and that's what I was kind of saying at the beginning. He's like the old master type character, right? Like he just punch good. He doesn't know all this boost stuff.
He doesn't
and
know
like,
any of the cool tricks. He just knows how to hit you.
yeah, that was kind of how his design was supposed to feel, and I think it really landed that.
Interesting. That's really cool.
And you do get to do you get to do fun stuff with ice spikes. Like I've thought about like theory crafted. If you put your ice spikes and just force them to go into the corner and how they can't cross out of your big scary hits type of stuff. But like that's where a lot of the more fancy stuff he does is about the positioning.
Right. I feel like the economic testing and the economic management and the positional stuff with the ice spikes and using that to mess with your opponent, that's where the skill testing is for Polar Knight. Because if he just had all this stuff for free, the game is over in 2 turns, right? Like you need to actually earn all of this stuff that we're talking about, and that might actually be beyond the scope of the guide. That might require a lot of Exceed fundamentals that we can't really teach you.
Yeah, he's a very fundamental testing character for 2 reasons. One is, like I mentioned, he kind of anti-synergizes with a lot of the stuff that Exceed gives you for free,
right?
Like good normal boosts and neutral boosts. And 2, his interaction points with the opponent are pretty slim. He doesn't have a lot of like free I win buttons unless he's hitting first and stunning you. His cards, they hit hard and they hit reliably, but the opponent can mostly do what they want.
Right.
So he's not that great at defusing setups without using like Stomp or Snow Slash or potentially Icicle Drop in the process. So, it's that like the the old master chivalry type character. He's, you can jump around and do 17 flips and karate chop me. I'm just going to punch you.
You can do your thing, right? He'll do the same thing. This sounds like an incredible segue into Counterplay, unless we have more stuff to talk about in the kit itself.
No, I think anything else really? I think that's kind of where we landed.
Yeah, Rose, anything else you want to add?
No, that sounds good. And I could even start off the Counterplay section with the kind of segue that we're talking about like the diffusing setups, etc. There's kind of an interesting tension of once you have this like ice spike carpet, who is incentivized to be on it. Like if you're sitting here and Ryu pulls out like 3 boosts, you can say, okay, I'm just going to like leave and then I'll block or something. I mean, Ryu's not a great example because he can overhead you. But like some characters, you can say, okay, I leave and you have to come into my ice spikes to get me. Other characters can say the opposite. They can say, okay, I see you have all those ice spikes, I'm going to leave. And your long range option doesn't work when there's so much ice spikes between you and them.
Right.
So that's part of the counterplay. It's like, be aware when you can force Polar Knight to like leave his fortress and come after you.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like, it's a little self or obvious, but in order to beat Polar Knight, you need to really understand what Polar Knight wants to do, right? His strengths are so severe that if you can, but they're all like play around a bowl. You have to kind of see what his setups are. You have to be able to see the fact that he can't really boost all that well without immediately striking at you and spending a bunch of cards is a real weakness. And his neutral is, he plays the neutral of a slow character who has Fierce a lot, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Slow character who has Fierce a lot is scary, but like that's kind of a one-note trick. And it also has Fierce a lot and relies a lot on pushing and pulling. So focus and focus likes are really good against him. Throwing
the tension between you could possibly break the focus, but if you can't, then
and if you're on the ice spike, then things go to hell pretty quickly. But like, are you willing to spend turns moving? Because if you move off the ice spike and he prepares, that's normally a pretty low tempo action, I guess is the meme. But at the same time, his with economy being his real downside and the fact that ice spikes are more flexible than econ, is that actually a win? I don't know. It depends on what got set up in the process.
Right.
It's also why Reach is, despite being on this really good card, actually an option worth considering, is Reach does let you get that like cheeky, I'm going to hit you, you thought you were safe, from my slow character with Fierce. Well, here's a range 4 sweep or something.
Yeah, or here's a, in a situation like this, right? It's like, here's a shovel drop. Good luck.
Yep.
Yeah, so obviously ignore armor, ignore guard, really good against him. His counterplays are pretty one note. So you got to be able to deal with that. and ignore armor and ignore guard. Ignore guard especially tends to beat a lot of his stuff. Usually you pay for it. Your slow options, like hitting him first with sweep. If you trade like 6-7 and you sweep a card, he sweeps a card. He doesn't really have hand pressure. Polar Knight is not really going to be pressuring your hand very much. He doesn't have advantage really. He doesn't have discard effects. You just kind of got what you got.
You're probably going to have resources when you need them to deal with him. He's not striking over and over again.
And even if he is, he likes striking, and he doesn't advantage chain when he does. So you can boost or draw cards in the process.
Okay.
So if you trade sweeps, even if he gets 1 extra damage in the process, like if you sweep him and then he sweeps you back for 7, or even 8, like that random discard can be, especially if you hit an icicle drop, you won that strike cleanly.
Right.
If you hit like a less critical card, like you hit a polar plow or a shovel charge or a stomp or something, you're doing fine, to be honest, unless he hit like something key.
Right.
So
that's caveats to that, because that is true. But also, if you're trading with him a bunch, he is trading up probably.
Yes,
like,
yeah, you can't.
Sweep gets you additional value, but if you trade like I don't know, a Tatsu for a grasp or something, you're supposed to win against most characters with that trade, and you didn't win against him because he grasped you and.
Yeah. I'm also not sure how you trade a Tatsu for a grasp.
Yeah, that's true.
His grasp stuns that pretty reliably.
If you can do a sweep trade, it's great, but Polar Knight has ways of making that very scary for you, looking at Shovel Slam.
Yeah, that's fair. So if you're like slightly trading down a bunch and then you win a strike, you win every third strike clean, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you're slightly trading down a bunch and you're not occasionally winning clean, you're gonna die.
You're gonna lose, right?
Yeah.
And if he invests in a good position, maybe every third strike isn't going to be enough if he hits you with icicle drop or something.
Yeah, and so when I say every third strike, that's because your counterplay
by a bunch either. Yeah.
What was that?
Oh, don't lose cleanly
if you lose
either.
Cleanly by like 8 damage, that's really hard to come back from if you're.
Yeah. But so when I say like win every third strike cleanly, that's because like you've got your boosts and you've got your newfangled shenanigans that your character can do, and you got to leverage those because this is the character who is pretty good at just punch, and so you've got to. And he's really tanky. He's got fast options. He's got mix-up options. The way to beat that is you do what you're good at, right?
Right.
So like a lot of your counterplay is like you just outplay him. And I think Rosie mentioned this in your initial summary. It's like you do what you do, and you got to be better than him.
Yep. Very specific counterplay, but worth mentioning. Polar Knight, the player is probably very aware if Icicle Drop will just win the strike. You should also be aware if Icicle Drop will just win the strike, because at least make them do it on their own turn. Don't strike into an Icicle Drop that just beats you for free.
Icicle Drop. Yeah.
Yeah. Striking into Icicle Drop is somewhere between bad and like absolutely disastrous because he advances and then it's his turn. So you're talking either a free grasp, like that's easily 15 to 17 damage, and if Stomp's involved, it can be up to 20.
Yeah.
And like Icicle Drop into Stomp advantage into Assault, which is a quite easy thing to set up, honestly. You Tatsu, there's a like ice spike here, right? You do a Tatsu or something to try and just get out of the way. He Icicle Drops, goes to, and then puts an ice spike here with the Icicle Drop after, stomps you.
Now you
just took 2 more, right? Like you do that. Or rather, I guess he pulls this one, does that, pops that. You're still on the ice spike. He has advantage, and then like he dives or something. And you're just dead.
Yeah.
That's what 19 damage. I think that's 19 damage.
That's too much damage to do in consecutive turns. Don't strike into Icicle Drop.
Yeah.
I mean, like if it's a mix-up, you might have to, right? But just if it always wins, don't strike and always lose to it.
Right.
Yeah, like sometimes you just eat the hit to defuse the situation. Like if you have an ultra like Metsuhado, for example, like you might be stuck just taking the 7 and saying screw it, right? Like it's bad.
Right, sure.
Don't do that with Icicle Drop. It's almost never worth it.
It's catastrophic to lose to. He has too much positioning afterward. He will kill you.
Yeah. I guess the counterpoint to that is if you absolutely have to strike into Icicle Drop, just hit him as hard as you can. right?
Okay.
Like just throw a 7, like throw a low tiger shot, throw something big. Except you're going to trade down by a bunch and at
Right.
least like get some resource value and make him hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Same with Polar Plow.
But with slightly less inflated numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like that's a lot of what it is, and like I think he's a real flavor win in that sense. Like he's the old master. He went out into seclusion training and learned how to throw ice and shovels, and doesn't know how to deal with any of the rest of the Exceed engine. He
Right.
kind of
And
hasn't quite figured that out yet.
he's good at his thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All
it's
right.
hard for these like fundamentals characters to talk about counterplay and counterplay because a lot of it is just like do what you do,
your
what
thing.
your character does.
Play Exceed really well. Totally. I mean, but that is like that's legitimate. And if there isn't counterplay beyond that, then we can't lie to the people.
One other thing that I want to mention, which is an important counterplay thing, is because his movement is kind of bad, he is somewhat susceptible to deck pressure.
Okay.
As his deck decreases and his mix-up options decrease, he gets more predictable, and him getting more predictable means it's harder for him to win strikes clean. He's forced to trade more. That also applies to you.
Yes.
So you have to do that while keeping your defensive options up, or else you just instantly die. But if you can, it is pretty bad for him.
Because if he detects an opening and you detect an opening, your opening is hitting for 5, his opening is hitting for 11.
Yeah, so you often have to like leverage boosts or set up stuff to make that opening happen.
Right.
And you need to like keep your shore use or keep your big movement or your flexible movement. Like if you're a Mole Knight and you have like headbutt up, right? Like you want to keep that type of card available. So you don't want to use it to like make an opening like some characters would want to do, because then he can punish that because his card quality is just so good.
Right.
But as the deck gets thinner and his card quality starts to decrease, maybe he's forced to play more normals. Maybe his specials stop covering all the gaps because he's got Shovel Slam down or Stomp down or Polar Plow down. Like you can take advantage of that. That's a very real. And Ryu's got the same problem, right? Once his mix-ups start coming down, he starts the holes in his kit start to show up.
Yeah.
And so that's true of Polar too.
That's an interesting point of comparison. That makes sense.
Yep. I mean, Ryu's more aggressively flexible and has positioning and has boosts to kind of deal with that kind of stuff. He's the martial artist, right? He does stuff by like boosts and precision and nuance.
Polar Knight doesn't understand any of those words.
he just bonks you.
Right.
Particularly notably, Stomp. Like this, we talked about when we were talking about this card. This does a lot of things you only get from Stomp. When you're out of Stomps, you're pretty exploitable sometimes. So this is a very good card to. Yeah.
And especially if your stomps and your snow slashes are down, you start being pretty abusable. Especially by cards that like will move you and also happen to hit at a modest speed.
Right. Yeah, you just are losing all of your important defensive options all at once there.
Yeah, and as mentioned, your gauge is not super tight, but it's tight, and whiffing an icicle drop is pretty bad.
Okay.
So you don't want to just like you're playing icicle drop with the expectation it's going to hit. If you just throw that out to try and defuse a mix up, then great if it works. If it doesn't work, you're in a bad shape. You lost to rebuilds. You spent a bunch of gauge. You like had 2 armor. That's the only upside I can think of.
Yep. Well, the flexible positioning, but still, yeah, it's not.
That's true. Yeah, it is stun immune after advance up to 3. So
you could have just CC'd, or you could have taken the move action with some of that, with that gauge, if you really needed to. Yeah.
Well, what is interesting is that it does, because of that, it does okay into mix-ups that like are advantage chain E, because you can reposition at low speed, so it's harder for them to keep up aggression. But you're kind of letting them punch you a lot, so that's not a thing you're great at dealing with, even if you do have some small mercy here and there. And you could have done that by playing Shovel Drop and gotten 1 fewer armor and not spent 3 gauge.
Right, of course.
And gotten an extra ice spike out of the deal.
So it sounds like that's our counterplay. That's Polar Knight, and Polar Knight has ample counterplay to what you're describing here. Like a lot of what we talked about earlier in the lesson has been like, how do you deal with focus? Here's all the ways that you can stun focus. Here's all the ways that you can leverage those things that you do have. So there's answers to a lot of the stuff. There's weaknesses that he has to shore up, but that's what he has to be aware of. That's what his opponent has to be aware of. Anything else we want to mention before we close out the lesson? This has been
There's
wonderful.
one more thing that we haven't talked too much about, which is dealing with boosts.
Okay.
Because that's probably the most important thing as Polar Knight in terms of counterplay, and we haven't really talked too much about it. So you've got your specific defensive tools, right? Like Stomp can cover some things, Snow Slash can cover some things, but you're dealing with boosts often in a kind of season 6-y way, right? Where you're just playing the card that you have to beat their mix up with the boost. You can't just
beat the card.
boost.
Oh, beat the boost.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's a real problem for him. That's really I would say his biggest weakness is his inability to deal with boosts on their own terms. So you have to really choose, like, are you willing to play the light to counter their light? I think the answer is often, it's reasonable because he is pretty weak to spike. And he's quite weak to light spike in particular, especially at range 3, because you're at range 2 you got Stomp, at range 3 you got nothing.
Right.
You can cross out, but that's it. Or Icicle Drop, and then good job, you set up Icicle Drop and spent a bunch of resources and hit. But especially for characters that might have extra fierces or have Swift is kind of annoying for him to deal with, because if you just try and spike him, it's semi-reliable, but you run the risk of getting absolutely exploded. But if you Swift spike him, that covers Shovel Slam now, like a +1/+1 type boost.
Yeah, even +1 speed can be difficult for him to deal with.
Yeah, so that's really where a lot of his game plan is going to be. It's kind of dealing with the nuance of the opponent's kit, not so much with their cards. He can out card quality you. If you're throwing cards at him, he's probably going to win.
Okay.
But the thing is that it's your kit as a whole, right? Those boosts, those little stat buffs, those little shenanigans, all the like little micro buffs that you might be able to get. That's where you start being able to beat him, and that's the boss character. Like that's the ideal boss character, at least in my mind.
Is he makes you rely on he's like the final exam. He makes you rely. You got to use every part of your character to beat him.
Yeah. It's like here's do what you do, right? You come in, you find the old master, and the old master's like, I'm gonna mess you up. Give me your best shot, and you gotta really work that.
Right.
Because if you're a newer player, you're just kind of playing heuristics, and you're just pressing things that you think are reasonable, and you're striking a lot. He's going to feel really unfair.
Yeah.
Because you're going to mess up maybe twice and take like 15, 6, 12 or 13 or 15 in the process. And you're just like, what is this garbage?
Right.
But as you understand kind of the nuances of like the boost game in particular and character specific stuff, he only, in quotation marks, has 6 guard on stuff. You can break 6 guard.
Yeah, but even with some power boost, it might require a mix-up, or it might require some specific positioning and care to set up, and that's Exceed. That's the game now.
Yep.
Okay.
But can you break 6 guard and also cover Stomp? Like,
right.
Now we're gaming. Can you break 6 guard and cover Stomp and Snow Slash? Like now we're talking.
What card is that? I don't know it.
6 card, Soul, Fierce, something.
Maybe with some EXs to deal with Stomp. I guess range 1 range 1 Wild Throw can't be
range
ignore armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually like the type of card that he just kind of has to eat.
Okay.
Because that's
unless he Shovel Slams it, right? Because it's only 3 speed,
right.
I think.
Because he has he There's mix-up on...
So, his kit is built to let you play mix-ups into boosts sometimes.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And you're supposed to win by enough that, sometimes the fact that you're playing 1 card to their 3, and they're adding a bunch of stats, you're getting the stats from your ability and the kind of nuance of your kit and just your base numbers, because it's hard for you to really crank those numbers up.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Without striking, which is kind of the point.
Yeah.
Gotcha, okay, cool.
Really quick, you normally ask... Oh, sorry, go on if you have more on this topic.
Oh, I was going to say, the sort of one other thing about that is that there's been, I don't want to say criticism, but like a thing that's a play pattern that comes up in Season 6 a lot for characters like that is when your cards are so centralizing, is the idea of your turn, my turn play.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, you're really good on your turn, you're really bad on your opponent's turn. He kind of avoids that, because even though, like you said, unless you're striking, but that's true of like getting across the threshold, but his base level of power is so high with the ice spikes, even defensively.
Oh, sure.
That like you don't crumple on defense. You have a crap ton of effective defense, and you have the effective power is still alive even on the opponent's turn.
Right. Yeah. You don't need to actually leverage. You don't have an action character ability or something like that. But
or you don't have to like do a Sea Viper type, boost into strike type thing. Like
right.
you're really you're always on. Like you're always this big scary character who the opponent has to deal with. And sometimes, you get around characters who want to strike a lot by just striking into them constantly.
Right.
And Polar Knight really can deal with that.
He can't be beaten that way. Okay. Cool.
He can, but you have to be like smart about it, and you have to have some kind of other stats. You don't beat him by just saying like I strike, because he's gonna start wild swinging. His wild swings ain't too shabby.
Right. Rose, you were gonna say something.
Yeah, if we have wrapped up, you normally ask about similar characters, so I was going to bring that up.
Oh yeah,
sure. Yeah, tell us.
You want to go first, Rose?
People love Polar Knight. They want to know more characters like Polar Knight. Who should they be looking for?
So we've talked I think maybe the phrase we said most this lesson is big red number. Other characters like Soul, etc., have big red number. We said he's kind of this like heavy, tanky, slow character. So like a Tager or a Treasure Knight might be similar in that way.
Okay.
We've said he's pretty fundamentals heavy. Like he is in his own way, right? He doesn't have like the boosts of Ryu or whatever. But if you just find someone who plays fundamentals, like
you'll probably like him the way that you like Polar Knight.
And then he is a season 4 character. They all try to be these platformer bosses, different amounts for different characters. But like a King Knight or something is also someone you have to like respect what he's doing.
I had a couple of characters in mind, and I think only one of them was in your list.
Okay. Yeah, who else we
got?
So
the characters that come to mind, Seijun, if we're going all the way back in time.
Yep.
M. Bison.
Okay.
Interestingly, Propeller Knight, because Propeller Knight is the opposite of Polar Knight, right? Propeller Knight is very positioning heavy also, but does it by boost quality rather than card quality, and like does lots of small micro adjustments all the time instead of like being this big lumbering character. So I feel like they share a lot of the same like fundamental skill testing stuff, but come at it from completely different angles.
It's expressed oppositely. That's cool.
Yeah, that's kind of the diametric opposite.
Okay.
Gold Lewis, less reliable, but a character who has trouble playing with boosts. Really relies heavily on card quality. Has that like big snowball economy, no pun intended, and does a lot of like this kind of like very nuanced. When do you pay out? When do you cash in? How do you use your gauge? Type of kit. Waldstein can be kind of like that. He's got sort of Waldstein is weirdly fundamental Z because of the way that his kit kind of ebbs and flows. Season 5, Carl Clover also has a bit of that. Some kind of fundamental Z, really cares about positioning nuance, weird jank economy. Carl would absolutely murder somebody for rebuild though. Like just go and throttle them. Like, give me card economy, please.
He has to remove Nirvana from the game though, instead of an ice. He
already has that. He has the attack that if he misses, he gets 2 cards, right?
That's
something
true.
Like that. Like, he would love to do that on a boost.
Right.
He has to do that mid strike, and it's awkward. Yeah. So like that's kind of the angle that I was taking. These more like nuanced-ish sort of position manipulators, and then like you mentioned, the Shotos are all really interesting characters. Big red numbers though. If you like punching good, Soul I think was the one character that we had overlap on. Soul do punch good.
He's famous for it.
He is weirdly, but of the punch good characters in season 7, he does not feel at all like Mei though, at least not to me.
Okay.
Like Mei's got some economy nuance, but Mei has very like sort of just keep running at them, just like grind them down and play very specific mix-ups with ignore armor, ignore guard, or try and like manage your hand. And then you've got a really powerful DB, you've got some other like shenanigans, but she plays a lot more of that like kind of boost micro, just throwing stuff at the opponent constantly.
Yeah.
Polar Knight feels more opportunistic, and that's what I think of as Soul more than Mei.
Got it.
Makes sense to me.
That makes sense. Cool. All right. So that is, I'm going to say, we have officially crossed into the longest excess exceed lesson Uh, I'm so proud of both of you. This has been amazing. I'm really really pleased. I had so much fun learning about this guy. I can't wait to try him out. Um, Andarel and Rose, thank you both so much for your time and your expertise. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Hopefully, people at home appreciate it as well.
Yeah, thanks for
Um,
having us.
Thanks for having
absolutely,
us.
absolutely. Looking forward to talking to you both again. Everybody at home, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Have
Take
a
care.
good one.